Chair.
Okay, so we have pretty much a full house this morning. In your pack this morning, you have minutes which are on pages 1 to 8. Can I just ask that those reflect the meeting which took place on the 8th of September? Councillor Dodd, I think you'll have to take that because you were present chairing that meeting.
Yes, I'm happy. Anybody want to bring anything? Sorry. Are we happy with that? All right, move on, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Dodd, so we'll accept those minutes.
It was a short meeting with a long agenda, I must admit.
Always has to have the last word. Right, we move on now to item number 3, which is a standing item. Disclosures of members' interests, and this relates specifically to the items on the agenda for today's meeting. Does anyone have an interest that they want to declare? Paul Rickard.
I'm Darton Director for Education and obviously have 5 schools in the Berwick Partnership.
Okay, thank you. And I'm looking around, can't see anyone else on any of these items. That's good. So we will note that one. We're now moving on to item number 4 on the agenda, which is forward plan of key decisions. Chris Angus will take us through that one.
Thanks, Chair. There's 2 items on the forward plan that will be going to Cabinet that are at this meeting, and that is the outcomes of the Berwick consultation and the support accommodation for lodgings for care leavers and young homeless. There's a couple of other reports on the forward plan that will be going to Cabinet, and they are scheduled to come to this committee beforehand.
Right, thank you for that. We now move into the substantive part of today's agenda, item number 5. You will recall a number of months ago I did indicate to members that I would invite the Regional Schools Director to a future meeting. Well, I'm delighted to say that Catherine Cowell is joining us this morning. Catherine has a short presentation she's going to run through, but Catherine's also got a very important meeting with, I think it's the North East Schools Conference this morning. So she does need to leave us once she's done a presentation. I think you're happy to take some questions, but what I would say to members is that this is overview. If you have specific questions about specific schools, we'll take a note and we'll get that information to you. But it's around the general principle of Catherine's role within academisation and academies in the Northumberland area. So on that point, Catherine, I'd like to welcome you to our meeting, and the floor is yours.
Thanks, Wayne. Thanks, and hello everyone. Yes, as Wen said, I'm Catherine Cowell. I'm the Regional Director for the North East, and I thought today it might just be helpful to set out a little bit about my role within the Department for Education. That has kind of changed recently, so just very briefly I'll outline that because you're probably not that interested, but then go into a bit more detail on the kind of school system kind of role that we have, and say a little bit about how we fulfil our functions, what those functions are, and how we work with the local authority in doing so. So yes, as I said very briefly, the Department for Education has gone through a bit of a change in structure recently and created regions groups. So whereby up until the summer I had just a schools role, we've now created a broader regions group which encompasses all of the kind of department's improvement and intervention work in children's social care, SEND and the school systems. We have a kind of regulatory improvement and reform role across all of those sectors, obviously done in kind of slightly different ways depending on the particular sector. But our aim very much in creating Regions Group was to even further work very closely with partners so that we can work together to improve outcomes for children through accelerating that system improvement and reform. So we have a regulatory and stewardship role. We have an improvement function, so I will come back to that kind of in schools in more detail, but on children's social care and SEND, for example, we fund a range of improvement programmes working very closely with local authorities, enabling the region to work together to continue to kind of improve local authority services in those areas. We, of course, intervene where there are weaknesses, both in local authority-run services, in children's social care and SEND, following Ofsted inspection, and have a range of mechanisms for doing so, including sort of improvement notices and statutory directions. Thankfully, in the North East, that is not something that we have a lot of activity on. And I think really importantly, in the creation of Regions Group, one of the things that the department really wanted to do was really strengthen the way that we work with local areas so that we can really play that sort of feedback loop between what's happening in places, what the needs and challenges are in places, and policy making back in the department. So that's a really key kind of function of ours, and it's why we work so closely with the local authority, with Audrey and her team, on a range of different issues. On the school side, everything from school improvement, where we've worked particularly closely through the Opportunity North East programme recently, but also on things around sufficiency, school places, free schools, SEND, sufficiency. All those kind of issues mean that we need to be really kind of joined up in the way that we work together. To enable that, we are, as a whole regions group in the department, organised regionally. So I'm the regional director for the North East, but there are 8 others of us based regionally. And really importantly, my team is kind of structured sub-regionally. So we have a team that links in with Northumberland, and we kind of can develop those close links. We're all civil servants. We're accountable to the Secretary of State. And we have a number of areas and functions that of decision making that are delegated from the Secretary of State, and most of those are sort of set out in decision making frameworks on gov.uk. So that's the kind of overview of where we sit in the department. If we could just move on a slide. So I thought I'd just go into a little bit more detail on how we fulfil that role and function in the schools space. And first of all, I thought I'd talk a little bit about the sort of regulatory and intervention role that we have, and then a little bit more about the kind of the commissioning and the development space. So just to kind of run through some of the kind of particular functions that we have, it's of course relatively rare, thankfully, that schools are judged to be failing by Ofsted. But of course, as you'd expect, ministers expect us to intervene promptly and decisively where that is the case, with a view to moving those schools back to good as quickly as possible. And we have a range of interventions, duties and powers to be able to do that. Where a school is a local authority maintained school that is judged to be inadequate, the Secretary of State is under a duty to intervene to move that school to a sponsor, a sponsoring trust, and other parties are under a duty to facilitate that move. And it's my team that facilitate that process. And in these circumstances, we assess which sponsor we think would be best fit for that school, including taking the local authority's view and or the diocese view where it's a church school. So we always try to work in partnership in finding that kind of best fit for getting that school back to good as quickly as possible. In the case of academies, I think we've sort of, over the past few years, really tried to sort of strengthen and clarify our processes here and tighten this up to improve consistency and transparency. So if an academy is judged inadequate, we would issue a termination warning notice. And that invites the trust to make representations. And then we decide whether that school would be better placed in another trust or whether the existing trust has the capacity to make rapid improvements. And we'll take a range of contextual factors into account in coming to that judgment. We have a range of things that we can do at that point. The trust can be monitored for a period before deciding whether to terminate the funding agreement. And that termination warning notice normally stays in place until the Ofsted judgment improves. So it means we're able to continue that close monitoring of what the trust is doing to improve that school. All of those termination warning notices are published with the conditions that we expect the trust to meet. There's another angle to kind of intervention in academy trusts, because of course, as well as the educational performance as judged by Ofsted, there's the kind of governance and financial accountability side. Academy trusts need to be compliant with the Academy Handbook, and we work closely with the Education Skills Funding Agency to ensure that that's the case. So if we find that a school, an academy trust rather, is found wanting in terms of its governance or financial regularity, we can issue a notice to improve, again, with a set of conditions that the trust must meet. And if they don't, we can escalate it to a termination warning notice. So a range of kind of ways in which we can, whether our weaknesses and failings kind of have a really tight hold over that trust until improvements are made. Thankfully, those are relatively few and far between. Most trusts, as in most schools, do a good job, but of course we do need those powers to be able to act where weaknesses are found. Just moving on to something that's very, very new. Schools not making the necessary improvements. As you will be, our ministers are very concerned about the number of schools and academies that have consecutive less than good judgments. So how do we ensure that those schools that haven't made that necessary improvement are encouraged to do so? So we have a new power to intervene where that's the case. It's not a duty, it's a power. And so we'll be inviting representations from schools that meet that definition of having consecutive less than good judgments. We wrote to schools this week actually to inform them where they meet that criteria, and then we'll be following up with seeking evidence from them as to whether or not they are making secure improvement, and then on a case-by-case basis making a decision over what to do, and where those are local authority maintained schools, of course, in collaboration with the local authority. Those cases, again, schools not making the necessary improvements are thankfully relatively rare. And so, of course, another part of our work is trying to spot and support vulnerability as soon as possible. So we have a trust and school improvement offer for any school that gets an RI judgment, or for trusts where there are signs of educational vulnerability. And that's a voluntary support offer, but it does enable us to fund 10 days of support from a system leader, usually a kind of MAT leader who can bring capacity from elsewhere, as part of helping and supporting schools and academies if they get an RI judgment. As part of that, we encourage trust partnerships, working in conjunction with a multi-academy trust to draw on that capacity, and sometimes to sort of see whether that might be a direction they want to move in before making that leap. We can also commission governance reviews from the NGA using National Leaders of Governance. So there's a range of tools that we can bring to support schools and academies that are showing some signs of vulnerability. It's essential, of course, that alongside that kind of support and intervention role, that we really work to try and strengthen trusts as well and strengthen the trust system. And so that's part of our work that I'll come on to in a minute. Just to sort of outline, within my team, every trust across the North East has a trust relationship manager. They sit within that sub-regional team that I talked about before. And so there's that constant and continuous engagement with trusts. Of course, in most cases where trusts are doing a good job, we let them get on with it, but we have that kind of relationship so that we're able to talk to trusts about where they might be struggling, where we might be identifying some support needed, or to be able to intervene when it gets to that position. Just before I move on to the next slide, I mentioned before that we work very closely with the local authority on things that aren't around kind of intervention, but are around places. So working very closely on things like SEND and mainstream sufficiency. Where might we need additional places? Where might those be free schools or indeed academies expanding or adapting their provision? And because some of those where it is an academy needs a decision from the department and from me to enable to do that, we work really closely to make sure that that's as joined up as possible. If you could just move on to the next slide. So as I said, a key part of our role is to support a coherent trust system and enabling that to develop, and particularly following the school's white paper. So I think more so now than ever, we are keen to say more about the sort of trust system and landscape we might want moving forward. Being much clearer about what constitutes a strong trust, and through commissioning, kind of only enabling those trusts to grow. So there's a lot of work underway in the department at the moment to really think about how we can be much more transparent and sort of open about the sorts of metrics and features that strong trusts exhibit. And so you'll see more on that over the course of the next months as that work develops. In sort of alongside that, over the next few months, we are going to be publishing more details about what we would like to see happen in terms of trust growing, where we want trust to grow, where we don't, the sort of features of trusts that we want to grow. So particularly putting that emphasis on wanting to grow trusts that have a really strong record in school improvement, that can meet the needs of local areas. And although Northumberland is not an education investment area, which you should be pleased about because it means that performance over the last 3 years in Northumberland made it not meet the criteria for being an education investment area, the principles are the same of wanting to kind of set out what does the future look like and how can we work openly and kind of collaboratively together in making those options available for schools and helping kind of schools make the right choices. And as part of that, we are ministers were keen to see whether local authorities might have a role in establishing trusts in areas where trusts are needed, and we're likely to say more about that in the next few weeks. To support that growth of strong trusts, we have some trust capacity funding available, and ever more so, that capacity funding is being geared towards enabling strong trusts to be able to really develop what they're doing and ensure that they're meeting the needs of local places. And I think that's all I wanted to say about our role, and I'm very happy to take any questions.
Well, first of all, thank you, Catherine, for giving that very comprehensive overview. And just on a personal note before I open to questions, I think there is what's kind of written through that presentation from what you've said is the word partnership. And I think in many moons ago, that was not necessarily something which was there. So I'm glad to see that is happening, because ultimately this is about supporting our young people in schools, whatever they are. So do we have any questions or comments or observations? I'll start with Trevor Thorne, Councillor Thorne there.
Yes. I just want to say I enjoyed your presentation very much and your sort of overview on what's happening. But, sometimes I feel that sort of schools are left to their own devices too much. I'm thinking it's actually on our agenda this morning of Berwick High School. Now, that has had a question mark over it for a long, long time. And people say to me, you're failing our pupils, not just now, but you failed them for about sort of 15, 20 years, too long. And, my question is, should we not be intervening more and doing more about this to improve the lot of those students at Berwick High School? Because, everybody accepts that, things can go wrong, but we need a fix. And the fix just has never happened. And it's a problem that's gone on far too long. And I would like to think that, your department with this overview comes in and does a little bit more
So
about it.
I think before Catherine comes in on that one, I think the point is we do have an agenda item about moving to a phase 2 for the Berwick School Partnership later on the agenda. And I think that, Catherine, you may want to cover just around that general improvement support that you can offer schools and the support staff in schools, which I think might be useful. I think you did touch on it, but I think a little bit more
absolutely.
detail.
So there are a range of different ways in which we support academies. And I mentioned a couple of them, and those are relevant in this case as well. So, where academies are judged to be RI and in an improving school, we have that trust and school improvement support, so continuous engagement from system leaders who can work with that school on the sort of action plan that they need to take and help them monitor the implementation of that. That is what that kind of trust and school improvement offer is designed to do, to provide that kind of that system support. We also encourage schools to work in collaboration with a trust, and that's happening in this case. And Opportunity North East has just come to an end, but provided that kind of ongoing support for schools like Berwick, but others as well in that situation where in order to make that kind of step change, that kind of consistency of support is required. We would say that it's our view that academies would be best placed in a strong multi-academy trust, and wherever possible we work towards that end.
I've got Audrey Kingham who wants to come in, and then I'll bring Mr Hodgson in.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Thorne, just to, I guess, endorse and reinforce what Catherine said, so we do work really closely together, and actually for the last 2 to 3 years have worked really closely on Berwick, particularly around the use of national leaders, senior leaders in there being able to support, trust to support, reminding everyone that Berwick Academy is a standalone Academy Trust with the Board of Trustees. However, just to remind everybody that all of their recent Ofsted reports have not only been positive in terms of upwards and showed improvement, but they have been deemed to be taking effective action. So accepting and understanding that historic perspective, we're all aware of that, but we are starting to see shift in that particular area. So it would be wrong of me not to represent the school in that respect and just, remind the facts members that is the case.
Thank you. I've got 3 speakers who've indicated they want to speak. In this order, it's Mr Hodgson, Councillor Ball and Councillor Dale. Mr Hodgson, could you perhaps explain, you're not a councillor, and what your membership is?
No.
You have that great honour of not being a councillor, so well done.
Right. I represent the Diocese of Hexham and Newcastle, the Catholic Diocese of Hexham and Newcastle. What I was just going to ask Catherine was the education investment areas that you've got planned coming through in that. I mean, years and years ago, I taught in London when there was real problems in terms of pupil outcomes. And massive was put into London. I mean, we can dress it up and say there was various strategies and improvement measures and so on, but basically, money was poured into London. Now, the impact has been that London pupils are now, I think, performing, is it about a grade above a GCSE than the rest of the country? Now, if this is a levelling up agenda, can we expect the same level of investment that London got in these 55 education investment areas? Because ultimately, it's not just about tinkering with various strategies. It's about ensuring that there's massive financial investment to back it up, because the proof has been London. And I presume that's one of your regions, isn't it? One of your 9 regions. And you must look at that region and think, gosh, I wish we could have had that investment. The London Challenge, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, London Challenge was a great success for a number of different reasons, and we took some of the best of that programme in Opportunity North East, so that consistent and long-term improvement plan working with a system leader, which has had some really great results across the North East. So we've moved a number of really quite stuck schools into becoming good. Which is great news. I think you'll have to ask your funding question to politicians.
I can't help but resist jumping in there. When I was on the Combined Authority, we did do a submission to central government, Gavin Williamson, for an education challenge. That was rejected. It's still sitting with the Combined Authority now, so it's something I'm still passionate about, and I'm sure as the Combined Authority potentially moves to a bigger footprint of 6, that will be something which is maintained. So we'll have a watching brief on that one. So I've got Councillor Ball and Councillor Dale.
Thanks, Chair. So I just want to know a little bit more about the interactions with teachers and the actual children themselves, because we've heard a lot about the schools and the business of the schools, but actually what's your interaction? Because we're seeing more and more great teachers leaving education because of the extra pressures put on them, whether it be having to run a food bank, school after school clubs, but still it's within their remit of their time allowed, so end up having to do marking and everything else and lesson planning at home and not within their actual contracted hours. So I'm just wondering a little bit more about that. Obviously, academies for me are becoming more and more business-like, and it's more about pounds, shilling and pence than actually about the children that attend the schools. We're seeing that a lot of children, there's some great trips, but if your parents can't afford to take you on the trips, you're missing out on that whole experience. So I'm just wondering, where do you stand on the poverty proofing and pushing that agenda as well? And just for me, education is far more than rolling out of high school with 10 GCSEs at A to C. It's actually about being able to handle adulthood, being able to apply for a job, being confident, all that kind of stuff. But teachers are under so much pressure to be able to deliver grades and exam results and make sure that they get an outstanding or a good Ofsted report, that actually some young people that are not academic in any way don't get that extra support. So there you go. Thank you.
Do you want me to answer it? I mean, my role doesn't have a direct link with teachers particularly. We interact mostly at LA level and at trust level. But I think the issues you outlined are, absolutely recognise, and part of the work I described about trying to be really clear about what is a strong trust and define that includes, and we said this in the school's white paper, includes stuff around workforce and well-being and, how that trust really enables a good sort of experience for its workforce as part of that consideration. So I think we'll start to see some measures of what it is that really good trusts do to recruit and retain staff, to ensure staff well-being, to reduce workload and those sorts of measures. But personally, I don't have that kind of direct involvement in most cases. Equally, I think there's a really strong emphasis in that work on inclusion as well, and destinations and some of those other things other than just educational performance. And the local authority will always raise kind of concerns that they have if any particular trust is doing something that we might want to encourage them to do something slightly differently. But I also see some really fantastic examples of trusts doing some brilliant work in this space to open up opportunities to young people who might not otherwise have had them, as do all types of schools. But I would say we see many, many brilliant examples of work there as well.
I think Audrey wanted to come in on a supplementary on that one, and then I'll move to Councillor Dale after that.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's just worth noting and going back. So Catherine's role has changed from Commissioner to Director, and what she talked about was a much wider remit. So we've now got SEN, we've got children's social care, we've got skills, potentially higher education in the future, maybe joining up, who knows. But actually, there is a pathway there in terms of having all of that connectivity, which you know, we have those conversations, but actually they're becoming much more formalised as a result of the reorganisation of the regions, if you like. So that can only be a good thing, so that we're joining up, instead of having very separated conversations. And I'll just give an example already this week. I think my team have had 4 or 5 regional DFE offers and new links coming in around finance, school improvement, whether that's available, something we want to pick up on, a digital offer. And actually, Graham and I have had meets with our SEN lead, but also our regional DFE SEN, who actually worked with us throughout the written statement of action, but of course doesn't need to do that work now because we've moved out of the written statement of action. That doesn't mean to say that we continue to have an improvement journey. So having that connectivity, not just on a singular siloed basis, but being able to almost do that integration is really helpful.
I've got the last, sorry, very quickly, because I've got the last 2, because
No, I
Catherine
would
does
just
need to
quickly
go.
say that I think, especially parents think that the academy structure is almost a law to itself. So if they put complaints in and stuff, obviously we've had this conversation where it comes back, we can't do anything because it's an academy. I just think, where do people go when they have a problem and they get told, well, we've investigated it, job done? Because I just think it does appear on many levels that academies are almost bulletproof.
And there's definitely lots of misunderstandings and myths that we definitely want to try and help improve understanding of. But academies, like any school, have a complaints process that will be on their website. I see my colleagues from Diocese nodding. Parents go through the school level complaint system up into the trust level system and eventually into the DFE if they don't get resolution, and then we follow it up. So just like in any school, there should be a complaints process that's clearly set out on their website, and we will follow up if it's not there.
Okay, that's fine. So what we'll do now is take the last 2 questioners, Councillor Dale and then Councillor Fairless-Aitken.
Thank you very much for the brief. Can I just ask you, obviously you've been post quite a long time and I've had contact with you before, and I understand you must have had enormous amount of work with actually bringing academies into the North East and people's misunderstanding and jostling for what they want and what they don't want, etc. You go on to mention very, very clearly about strong academies. Can you basically describe what you mean by strong? Only because what I want to decide is if you think is bigger is stronger, or how you like to decide. Is it just on academic outcomes, or I mean, you cover the region, and I don't really know, is the region just the North East, or is it Middlesbrough, or down to Teesside, or whatever, but just to, find you. So it's this idea about strong, and I've got, it's really good, but it would be great to have a definition of what strong means as far as you're concerned as a civil servant.
So the region is the North East, but that's the 12 local authorities, so down to the Teesside local authorities, in the Schools White Paper we set out kind of the 5 factors that we think make a strong trust, and to sort of describe that in kind of words, we are going to kind of specify this in more detail through the sort of way in which we would then talk about that publicly in terms of trust kind of metrics or however we decide to do that. But absolutely it's about, first and foremost about educational kind of outcomes, isn't it? It's about improving outcomes for young people. And enabling young people to reach their potential, whatever that those outcomes are. It's around inclusion. It's around the kind of financial management of that trust, ensuring that they are sustainable and able to offer that good educational experience for young people on a sustainable footing. It's about their workforce, governance, So yes, the Schools White Paper sets out those 5 factors, and I can send around a link to them, but that work is kind of developing to really kind of try and articulate exactly how you would know, what you would be able to look at to be able to tell that. It's not necessarily about size, but of course the Schools White Paper did set out that we think it is more likely that you will be able to demonstrate those features of a strong trust and have the capacity to do that once you get to a certain size. So we mentioned in the Schools White Paper that we expect trust to be sort of heading towards 10 schools or 7,500 pupils, I think. That's not a hard and fast rule. It's a signal that, standalone academies, we don't think of the future. It's trust with a bit of capacity and size about them. Some will be bigger than that. Some are substantially bigger than that. But equally, it was a signal that we don't expect all trusts to be very large. There will continue to be a range of sizes that are effective.
Thank you for that. And finally, Councillor Phyllis Aitken.
Yes, thank you for that. It was just to tie in with what Councillor Ball said, so you may have answered some of it already. My concerns are primarily with academies being kind of, rogues almost in the system, and how well regulated they are. You did talk about measures that you can take if they're failing, and this is presumably flagged up by Ofsted, mainly every 4 years. In between times, I'm increasingly seeing sort of children in even good academies that are doing well being treated in terms of data. It's data or money. Less, every child matters every year that goes by. Whether that's, I'm seeing narrowing of curriculum choices and diversity within our academy system. So courses will be shut if there's not enough bums on seats. Less and less after school activities for children that have suffered during COVID. I'm seeing executive pay structures increasingly look massive compared to support staff. And teachers disillusioned by the academy process. We did obviously see one school in the west of Northumberland be brought into special measures and go back under local authority control with Bright Tribe, and I really don't want to see that happen again. I'm wondering what other measures between the Ofsted reports are the triggers for you to intervene and come in and say this is not being run well, not just on results, not just on data, not just on money, but actually the holistic approaches of the schools themselves, and that's what really worries me within the academy system.
I would just want to reiterate the point I made earlier, that I think there are some trusts doing some absolutely fabulous thing. I don't think this is an academies versus other types of schools issue. I think if there are schools where there are improvements to be made, whatever type of school, then, between us, we kind of work on that. But specifically on your point, Ofsted kind of goes in every 5 years or so. We look at things like, we do look at financial health, because that does tell us something about how a trust is being run, because we do look at benchmarking about where that funding is going, what sorts of things is it being used on, and we can benchmark that in all sorts of ways across the whole sector. We look at governance. We look particularly at complaints. So if we get a number of complaints about a trust, that might give us a kind of something to kind of go and investigate. We look at data, but actually over the last few years, data is something that we need to treat really cautiously because it doesn't tell us the whole picture, particularly at the moment. So we treat data really cautiously. We have an annual trust review with trusts where we'll talk through a range of kind of all aspects of their kind of operations. So absolutely we do try to have that kind of overview of what's going on in a trust, but the intervention trigger will largely come through that kind of Ofsted or a kind of particular financial non-compliance with the financial handbook route.
It's my mistake. Councillor Swinburne had indicated to speak on a number of occasions, and I chose to ignore him. So, Mark, a really quick question, please, because Catherine does need to get off to a conference. So, Mark Swinburne.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Catherine, for coming along. As a former chair of this Scrutiny Committee, one of the things that we've always said from this authority is that despite academies not being part of the authority, we're more than happy to provide help, support to anyone who needs it. Can you clarify that anybody in education who requires anything like that does not have to go through your area. They're not restricted. It's not. I know some of my colleagues have said there's this impression that academies are, you know, off on their own, but they're not a closed shop. It doesn't have to flow through your area. That, you know, it's not restricted, and that anyone who requires help or support, there is that constant flow that they can come to us for, and you know, we do require that information between the academies and the authorities to be able to work properly together, and we all need to work together, and it's not that chain where everything needs to go up to your area, come from your area to the authority. Everybody needs to work together. That's nothing against, you know, anything my colleagues have brought up. That's just there seems to be some issues in some areas with some academies that they appear to be working in this closed shop, and that we do have some problems somewhere. But if you can clarify that we do work together and it doesn't have to just come up to your area, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
I think there are probably daily conversations between Audrey and her team and a range of trusts and academies across Northumberland that have absolutely nothing to do with me. There's a huge range of trust to trust and trust to school partnership and collaboration work going on that exists within local areas to improve things. So,
okay, just before we finish,
particular issues, then let us know and we deal with them.
We're going to have to invite you back because you're very popular this morning, because I also deliberately ignored Paul Rickard as well, apparently. I didn't see you. My apologies, Paul.
I'm used to it, Chair. Don't worry. I think it was more just to reassure that from our perspective as both dioceses, if I'm allowed to speak on well, there are a hybrid of conversations that go on, whether it's with the RSC, whether it's the local authority, whether it's dioceses maintain schools. So there are those networks working all of the time, which are really healthy, to be honest. And we do talk to each other if there are problems, because our children are your children are your children. And if we take it back to the child, I think, to be fair, historically, there were silos. But I would like to say that there aren't anymore. I think there's a huge openness and honesty now between all those who care about children to work together for the benefit. So hopefully that's a bit more reassuring. I think the days of people operating on their own are the rarity as opposed to that which is common now.
Very last word. I was just about to say actually exactly what Paul has said. To reassure you, so there are some actually lots of financial transactions that go on. So a number of our academies buy our services. So and I think that has been challenging historically, but we have really good working relationships. It is about people and working together, and actually we have gone to academies and we've opened doors and we've talked to them, and I'll be honest, I have challenged, and I have those conversations with Catherine and I have those conversations with Paul on a regular basis, and actually Paul will have conversations with me. So I think the relationships are very good. It is about our children at the end of the day. They're all of our children and all of our responsibility, and we want the very best for them.
Great, thank you. So I'd like to put on record my thanks to Catherine Cowell for attending this morning. We will have an open invite to you to come along at any time you want. We'll probably have to have a special session. You're so popular. But thank you again. What I will do is I'll make sure that this presentation is shared with all members, because I think it's a very useful starting point for us. But thank you again very much for attending, and enjoy your conference for the rest of the day. Right, we're now moving on to the rest of the agenda. So we're now on item number 6, which is the outcomes of consultation on the Berwick consultation. Now, I just want to be very clear about this before we go into this session. We've had phase 1 of consultation. This is phase 2. This is not the be-all and end-all. This is not the final do or die. This is part of an ongoing consultation and dialogue that we're actually looking at this morning, and it will be going to Cabinet on Tuesday of next week, and we have Guy Renner-Thompson, Cabinet Member Children's Services, here this morning with us. I know that Guy does need to leave a little earlier, but he will be here, I think, for the first part of the presentation. So, on that point, what I'd like to do is hand over to Sue Aviston, who I think will open up this particular session, and then I know Guy wants to speak after that, and then we'll move into our role as scrutineers. So Sue, over to you.
Thank you, Councillor Daly. Really, just to follow on from obviously what Catherine Cowell was saying, that actually the report put in front of you today regarding this consultation has been very much a partnership, not only with the local authority, the schools, the governing bodies, our colleagues in the diocese, as well as our regional schools commissioner. So this is a perfect example of teamwork and how we've all come together to come to some conclusion of how to move forward to the next steps. So really, I just thought that probably just links quite nicely to what you've already been told this morning. But the report in front of you sets out the feedback from stakeholders arising from phase 1 of our pre-informal consultation, as Councillor Daly has already recommended. This was a step in consultation that we probably haven't done before, but felt that we needed to do an extra level of consultation with the Berwick community in order that they could fully understand the issues actually faced by the wider partnership. So again, what we're giving you in this report is the feedback on that consultation, and just to remind you that they were asked, the community, the schools, the governing bodies themselves were asked their views on whether they felt the phase 2 consultation that we're going to be seeking Cabinet approval for would go out in the organisation of just a 3-tier system of models or a 2-tier model of organisation. So really just to talk about the consultation process and what we've actually undertaken, again as a group of officers. On the 12th of April, Cabinet approved the phase 1 consultation, which began on the 23rd of May and concluded at midnight on the 12th of August. That was a couple of weeks longer than I think you'd originally approved, but we felt we needed to extend the consultation timeline to give everybody enough opportunity following the public events to draw their own conclusions and respond to the consultation. Again, the method and format used to carry out the consultation is set out in paragraphs 14 to 20, but as has become custom and practice, you'll be aware we have produced a consultation document. Again, that is contained appendices 1 of your report. We also had a dedicated Padlet, which is something that evolves during the consultation process, and it's a one-stop shop for all the documents, frequently asked questions, and any other relevant information around the partnership. Something that we started to do during COVID lockdown when we actually couldn't carry out face-to-face consultations, but we've enhanced that and continued to operate that. We did hold public events as part of this consultation. So we held one in Belford and one in Berwick. These were attended by 58 people, of which 32 were parents or members of the public, and the remaining 26 were either staff or governors of the schools in the Berwick Partnership. We also held one event for staff only, and that took place in Berwick, and there were 28 staff that actually attended that event. The events were also attended by all of the schools, and they also had the opportunity to set out their views with their staff and with members of the public. And sorry, my connection's gone. There we go. Sorry. Technical issues. Okay, so some of the feedback then within your report again is summarised in paragraphs 21 to 52. But really just to give you a brief summary, particularly around the governing body's responses, and again they are contained in paragraphs 24 to 39. And the full copies of their responses are also contained in the background papers, and hard copies of which were also left in members' meeting rooms and areas for you to read in hard copy. And they can be, obviously this information can be further summarised by saying that of the 15 governing bodies that form part of the Berwick Partnership, 9 have responded to say that they were in favour of a 2-tier system of organisation, a primary secondary. of which 7 were first schools, the high school, the one high school, and one governing body that is jointly responsible for a first and a middle school were all in support of a primary-secondary organisation moving forward. There were also 4 schools in the partnership that were strongly in favour of a 3-tier system. Those are being the 2 remaining middle schools and 2 of the town first schools strongly supported the 3-tier system. And 2 schools stated that they didn't have a preference, and one of those being the Grove, so really they wouldn't have been directly impacted by the organisation of the other schools. We also received feedback from staff, so again 73 staff working in schools in the Berwick Partnership responded to the consultation, and again a breakdown of their responses is shown at paragraph 40, which shows the majority of middle school staff support the 3-tier system. All of the high school staff support the primary-secondary 2-tier system, and first school staff were more evenly split, with 8 preferring primary and 6 preferring the 3-tier system. Again, the Church of England Newcastle Diocese Education Board has also indicated that it would favour a 2-tier system over a mixed system of education in the Berwick Partnership. And again, a summary of their responses contained in paragraph 4. And as Paul Rickard has already suggested, there are 6 schools in the partnership that are of C of E faith, so therefore have a significant number of schools that would be impacted by these changes. We also received responses from 2 parish councils, and they specifically responded around the question we asked around Belford Primary School, and I'll come on to that in a little bit more detail. But again, their responses was that they felt that the catchment area of the school should be moved to the ANIC partnership. And now moving on to the wider community and their responses, we did send just over 6,000 consultees were sent the link to the consultation document. And of those, 365 responses were actually received, which when taken into context of just over 2,000 or nearly 2,500 pupils on rolls in Berwick schools is probably a little bit more, is probably lower than we'd have hoped for. And again, is slightly lower than the responses that we received when we carried out the previous community survey, and we got 436 responses to that more high level principles that we ask questions on. So again, and it's something that I constantly tell FACS members when presenting these reports, that consultation isn't a referendum. And again, the numbers stated in the report should just be seen as an indication of the current views of the community. But again, any decisions made by the Council's Cabinet and scrutinised by yourself will obviously be there for many years to come. So while we do take account of the responses that we have received, they should not be seen as the only determining factor when coming to any conclusions as we actually move forward with this consultation. Again, we did, of those responses that we received, the 365, 194 of them supported the view that schools in Berwick should remain organised in the 3-tier system. Excuse me. And 95 of the responses, were from parents of children in the Berwick school system. And again, the reasons that they gave for preferring the 3-tier system are contained in paragraph 45 of your report. Sorry. 142 responses that we received did support the views that the schools in Berwick should be reorganised to a 2-tier system. And of the 63 responses, again, were from parents of children in the Berwick partnership. And again, the reasons they gave for supporting the primary-secondary reorganisation are contained in paragraph 46 of your report. We also had 29 responses to the consultation who were unable to identify which system they believed would better achieve improvements in educational outcomes, improve the viability and sustainability of the schools. And again, of those 29 responses, just over half of them came from parents with children in the Berwick system. So during consultation as well, we also asked 5 specific questions around schools changing partnerships, as well as direct questions around special educational needs, early years and post-16 provision. The feedback to these questions are contained in paragraphs 48 to 52 of your report, but can be summarised as follows. So we did ask a question: do you think that that Glendale Middle School and Woolerford School should remain in the Berwick Partnership or move to the ANIC Partnership? Again, we received 28 responses from consultees who actually responded to the question, had a direct link to the community of Wooler and Glendale, and were parents, either parents of children on the rolls of the schools, a governor or a member of staff. Of this group, 8 favoured the schools remaining in the Berwick Partnership, and 16 favoured the school moving into the ANIC Partnership, and 4 selected that they didn't know. We also asked the question: do you think that Belford Primary School should remain in the Berwick Partnership or move to the ANIC Partnership? Again, unusually, 28 responses came in for this, to this response as well. And again, those more directly and live in the community, parents of children on the roll, governors and members of staff. So 2 of those that responded were in favour of remaining in the Berwick Partnership, and 26 were in favour of moving to the ANIC Partnership. We also asked questions around how special educational needs could be met and how we could actually grow capacity within the system in Berwick, particularly around addressing children that have social, emotional, mental health and ASD. We received 192 comments submitted by consultees, and a themed list of responses are contained in paragraph 50 of your report. And again, just to highlight some of the suggestions that came forward, was around rebuilding and expanding the existing Grove Special School and increase its capacity to cater for all children with a wider ranging of special educational needs. There was also suggestions around additional alternative provision and increase the offer there, so that small group intervention work on short-term placements that were closely linked to mainstream schools should and could be developed. We'd also received suggestions that the primary and secondary schools, or first, middle and high, should have an outreach unit stroke primary support base where a child could have a part-time timetable before being reintroduced back into their mainstream school. We also asked questions around the current level of availability of early years provision in the Berwick Partnership, and again 128 comments were received, and overall everyone that fed back to the consultation felt that the early years provision in Berwick was viewed to be of a high standard and offered a wide range of options for parents. However, some did raise some concerns around perhaps the offer in specific, more rural locations didn't provide that level of choice, and particularly around specific age groups. There was concern probably about around the younger age groups' needs and not necessarily being met in every community. There's also concerns from a number of people around the viability of early years providers moving forward as the birth rate continues to fall within the partnership and the number of surplus places. And again, how that would create competition. And so there were suggestions around how people should be working more closely together and encourage partnership working, We also asked around post-16 provision. And I think members might remember, I think when the funding was put in the medium-term financial plan, there was quite a debate at full council around post-16, post-18 provision in the Berwick community. So again, we asked that question. We had 102 comments received, and again, lots of that information is contained within your report, but it's all about further investment in post-16 education, more advice around careers guidance, making sure there's more choice around subjects that are on offer. There was some concerns around transport and getting pupils to the nearest provider. And then there was also lots of suggestions around building links with existing colleges, universities, and also thinking about post-16 provision for our SEN learners and having some form of specialist sixth form that would be available for them. So lots and lots of suggestions around post-16. From the consultees as well, also put alternative proposals. So again, 115 comments in respect of alternative proposals, both within the 3-tier and 2-tier systems. And again, they're summarised on paragraph 53. And hopefully you can see that some of those suggestions have been taken forward in the models that you can see in paragraphs 55 and 56 of the report. And there will also be opportunities moving forward if consultation is approved, that people will still be encouraged to submit further alternative proposals or build on the suggestions that have already been made. So in conclusion then, I think again, just to reiterate again during consultation on school structures, you know, that they're not referendums. This gives us an idea of, you know, what a particular group of parents, particular community are thinking at a particular time. However, while the feedback from this phase 1 consultation has been interesting, it has not been conclusive, and I think that has come through in the information that we've shared with you this morning. And therefore there wasn't a clear view in relation to a favoured model of organisation in the Berwick Partnership. So whilst, again, as I've already highlighted, 9 out of the 15 schools are in favour of reorganisation to primary secondary, the responses from parents, staff and the wider community appear to be more evenly split. Therefore, given the feedback submitted by the respondees to this phase 1 consultation in relation to the benefits and negatives of both systems, it's proposed that it would not be appropriate to take forward only one model of organisation into phase 2. And therefore, we are recommending that Cabinet approve the next phase of informal consultation on both a revised 3-tier model and also a 2-tier model of organisation. This again is set out in paragraphs 56 and 57 of your report, which reflects the changes required to schools in light of the issues also set out in the background papers to your report. And the proposals again are also set out 2 options to expand provision for special educational needs in Berwick, and that again is set out in more detail in paragraphs 59 of your report. I don't propose to go into details around the models this morning because these are suggestions. They will be subject to change, I am sure, during the next phase of consultation. So I propose really to leave it there in terms of details on the models. There is also some detail around other implications and how they would impact on staff, catchment areas, transport, early years, post-16, and particularly around our rural schools. And again, I'm just highlighting those two. Don't propose to talk in any detail. The next phase of feedback to consultation will be appropriate to go into more detail there. And again, I think it should also be noted that this recommendation to move forward with 2 options to the next phase does not impact on the original timeline that we set out, and therefore the feedback from phase 2 consultation will come back into FACS and Cabinet in the early spring as previously indicated. Thank you, Chair, that's everything.
Thank you, Sue, for that very comprehensive report. So again, just to be very clear, we have done a sounding, and that sounding has not brought, hasn't said everything's wonderful, let's just leave it as it is. It's brought up effectively what may look like 2 options, a 2 or a 3-tier model. The granular detail which sits behind that is for further discussion. What we're looking at this morning is our view to feed to Cabinet next Tuesday on phase 1, moving to phase 2 of perhaps a more granular, nuanced discussion with the community, with the educationalists, with the parents in the community, because there is a £40 million cheque sitting for the community of Berwick, investment into education, which was agreed by council, I think it was last year, for that investment. So I just want to be clear that today is not the end of the story. This is the start of the story. This is the start of a community shaping and framing what its future looks like. So on that basis, do we have any comments? So Councillor Fairless-Aitken. Oh, sorry, I totally forgot. I am totally on one this morning. I said I would bring Guy in first. He's waving madly. So Guy Renner-Thompson first, then Councillor Fairless-Aiken.
Thank you, Chair. Of course, I'm not just the Cabinet Member for Children's Services, I'm also a local councillor to the Berwick Partnership. So I'm well acquainted with the history around the north of the county there. So the Conservative Council at the time decided to include Berwick in 2019, so we're going back 3 years now into our school build programme, which, as I keep repeating, because I don't think we get enough credit for, included Hexham, Pontyland, Hainbridge, Seaton Delville and Amble, which is quite unique among local authorities in England. But it soon became clear that simply rebuilding a new high school wasn't an option. No school is an island. The Berwick Partnership is rather complex. There are around 12,000 people live in Berwick town itself. There are around 10,000 people live in the rural part of the partnership. There are 17 schools involved, and there's also one independent school at Longridge, which is the only all-through age independent school in the county, which does have an impact on the high school within the town. The surrounding areas are Alnwick, which went two-tier in 2016, and then you've got Scottish Borders, which has been two-tier for as long as I'm aware of. When Alnwick went two-tier in 2016, it did have an impact on the Berwick Partnership because historically it was quite okay and normal for children from Wooler and Belford and further north into the partnership to travel to Alnwick if that's how they so choose. It was not a problem when both partnerships were three-tier, however now with one being two-tier and one being three-tier, it leads to some discrepancies. So it was inevitable that at some point there would be a conversation around three-tier and two-tier within the Berwick Partnership. Not to say that three-tier isn't possible within the Berwick Partnership, but there would, of course, have to be some changes. Belford Middle School closed in 2018 as a result of Alnwick already choosing to go three-tier in 2016, which left a primary school in a three-tier partnership. Wooler Middle School has had similar conversations for a number of years, but we sort of said to them, can you wait until we do a whole partnership approach? So this is about looking at the partnership in the whole. It's moved from just building a new high school, as wonderful as that would be, into looking at the whole partnership and the best system for that partnership looking forward for the next 50 to 100 years. As Councillor Daly says, there's £40 million capital in the budget, which is a huge, significant sum of money in terms of council budget. So whatever is built has to be built to last and has to work. Otherwise, what was the whole point? So this is all about moving on to the next stage to be approved or not approved by Cabinet on Tuesday. And Cabinet would love to know the views of the Scrutiny Committee before they make that decision. But it is all about further consultation, not about making a decision on school structures on Tuesday. And to reiterate, because there has been some comment on this, the original timing of the consultation process has not changed. This is not an additional layer of consultation which is pushing back a further decision. This layer of consultation would have already been there. The only decision for us was what to include in that layer of consultation, and this is what we've decided to include in it. So thank you.
Thank you, Guy. So I'll move to Councillor Fairless-Aiken, then I've got Lynn Horton, I've got Mr Hodgson, and then Councillor Dale.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, I found this a very difficult read, and it isn't clear at all. It's very ambiguous. I found the lack of the results for the Berwick Academy for this year. I'm hoping that they can be added in, because obviously they weren't available when the consult was done, and that is a key pivotal point as to why people are abandoning the high school, and that needs to be discussed with the community. And I think there were some good suggestions, some heartbreaking stuff from the middle schools, but there were some good suggestions about having a community consult on that specifically as to why the community is abandoning its high school. I suspect it's a no-brainer that it's down to the results and is necessarily sticking good local authority schools onto a struggling academy the fix, and I don't think it is, which is why the three-tier system, I'm more or less in favour of that. Certainly it was close. It was 53% of the community were for three-tier and 39 were not, and then undecided. I felt that someone said it was insufficiently ambitious, the two options that were there, I mean, it's obviously a really tough thing to decide what you're going to drop and what you're going to add with the 40 million budget. I found, looking at the Hexham consult, obviously the Stars won and helped and fought that process, and the solution was multi-form entry, which isn't an option here, so moving a middle school onto the site with the high school to allow for year 7 entry and year 8 entry, flexibility, options and choice within the system. That's what parents want to see, not just a shiny new build. They want that there, and that will allow for that to happen. And I'm sad that that wasn't one of the options, and I wonder if that could be looked at further. And that the 3-tier option, which I think is the braver option, to go for that, didn't allow for the Grove to be a part of that in a way. And I think it's a lot braver to stick with the 3-tier system and also look at the Grove School and put them maybe on the same site with garden space and the expansion that's needed for both schools, and lure parents in that way. That's what parents want to see. They want to see, they don't want to see a shiny new building that's superficially repaired. They want to see the money going back into the system. So take the 40 million and put it back into a system that's not failing, really. The 3-tier is not failing its rural environment. It's the money that's the problem, I know. But I would just like to see, more community consult and the possibility of a multi-form entry that allows for the system to organically develop while giving choice to parents.
So one thing, if I can just clarify there, you asked a specific question about the results from the academy being included. So can I just confirm, will the results be included?
Once the data becomes validated, then we can include that, but obviously we haven't got any validated data.
Right.
Ivy might know more when it's likely to be out, I'm not sure when.
We'll look towards the end of October, start November, before the results will be validated.
Okay. And does that interfere with any of the timelines going forward on the consult with this? Or?
No. Don't think so.
Okay.
But it can create some quite marked changes, particularly this year with the way the exams have ran this year post-COVID.
We've got an assurance the data will be there.
Yes.
So that'll inform, if we're minded to support this, and obviously Cabinet do, that'll inform phase 2. So good question there. Next one, I've got Lynn Horton.
Thank you, Chair. From a teacher's point of view, when I was reading the report on page 36 where it talks about the perceived problems with the GCSE results remain, having been in a partnership myself with the Blythe partnership, I fully understand where those comments are coming from, because the school that I am at for a long time has had an entrenched viewpoint from the community. When the other school, when Bede Academy was placed in Blythe, there became them and us for a very, very long time. It was the school at the other side of the town, and there was us, and there was almost like a divide down the middle of the town. And if you went to Bede, you were one type of student, and if you came to us at Blythe Academy, you were another type of student. And the historical viewpoint of our school has taken a very, very long time to change that perception in the community. Our results have got better and better and better since becoming a multi-academy trust school, and we've got better and better results, so that we are not seen now by a large number of parents as the second choice of school, because we do get those results. And it's been so. Looking at what Tweedmouth was saying, it is very much going to be a long-term work in progress to change the public's perception of Berwick Academy, and from the reports that have been coming through, the shoots of improvement are there, and it took a long time for us because we were historically an RI school, and we are now a good school in our latest report, and that's through the hard work of all of the stakeholders within our trust and the local authority and everyone that works with us to get to where we are. So, I look forward to seeing the green shoots continue and the public perception in Berwick, whatever model is chosen, happen, because the students are at the core of that. However, on a trade union point of view, I have been asked to say that the staff in the schools, in the proposed models that are going to close, are very disappointed to read that in a paper in Northumberland before reports were put out. Obviously, I have seen this report prior to coming here today, but the staff in Scremiston, in Glendale, had not any notification that they felt very unhappy about that. So I was just asked on behalf of my members to say that there is a lot of disappointment to see that there is the potential for the closures, that there's not been any significant discussion about that, and you may well have seen that there is an awful lot of publicity now in the north of the county around petitions to prevent the potential closures, because we've already said this is not a full-gone conclusion and there are still many stages to go, but you do have a lot of very disappointed teaching staff up in the Berwick Partnership to have read some of the changes that are potentially going to go ahead.
Thank you for that point, and I'll ask Sue if she can perhaps address that last point, which I think is an important one.
Yes, certainly, and I think it is a little bit disappointing that we have been working with the head teachers probably over the last 12 months, and I've been very clear about there would be school closures moving forward. The heads have been very, very clear about that. Yes, people would not have found out what the individual proposals would be for the next phase of consultation. But every head teacher was given a phone call to tell them what was in the report. We cannot give reports ahead of them being published to elected members, to members out, school head teachers and staff. But head teachers were all found, had an individual call from either me or one of the senior managers in my team to let them know the detail that was in the report and what they could expect to see the next day. And as soon as the report was published on the website, every head teacher was sent the link so that they could then have that discussion and talk with their staff. Moving forward, if this consultation does get approved, and again, Lynn, I'm sure you've been involved in meetings when we've done this, we will be holding 36 meetings in the Berwick Partnership, one with every staff body, one with every governing body, and there will be a significant number of public events also planned as part of the next phase of this consultation. So I think probably staff wanted to have their say before we've even agreed to go out to consult, and I understand that that's a natural reaction, but please reassure them that we will be coming to speak to them all. They will have their opportunity to express their views fully to us, and also for us to give them the assurances around how staff deployment will work in the future. Again, like you've seen, we've operated in many school reorganisations and school closures in the past. Okay.
Thank you very much. Like I say, I think it's the natural reaction, especially in the current climate when there is the potential for job losses. So thank you for that clarification. I will feedback that back to all our members up in Berwick.
And just to add on to that as well, I know David Street wants to come in with a comment. David.
Sorry, it's just a slight clarification on the comment I made earlier. It looks like this year validated GCSE results is going to be into January, which is later than in previous years. The other comment I think to consider with it is, and I understand why the question is asked and the importance of trying to gain that information, but actually you will find that we've been asked by DfE and Ofsted are not inspecting schools based on the set of results that have just come out. Because of the nature of this year's results, the gap that we've had, the COVID influence, etc., they're not comparing schools on their current sets of data. So I appreciate why you might want to know some of that information, but I think we are going to have to get thinking caps on about how we demonstrate that, particularly when, as I say, DfE and Ofsted are not using this year's results as a judgment of quality.
Thank you for that clarity. I've got 6 speakers and I'm going to tell you who they are, but I'll introduce you as it needs to be. So Mr Hodgson, Councillor Dale, Paul Rickard, Councillor Ball, Councillor Dunbar, Councillor Dodd. So Mr Hodgson, first of all.
First of all, apologies on behalf of the Diocese of Hexham Newcastle for not responding. I've since spoken at length with Deborah Fox, the director there, and yes, they are in support of the 2-tier option. They've got some capital funding to invest with St Cuthbert's. That becomes a primary school, and their view is that the long-term viability of the school would be fine. She did also say as well that because of the distance to the nearest Catholic secondary school, which was Bedlington, the vast majority of the children from St Cuthbert's tend to stay within the Berwick partnership and obviously go to Berwick Academy. So it's just an interesting thing there that numbers-wise, the Catholic students tend to stay within Berwick. But again, apologies for not responding.
Because that formal response that you'll have put through into the system, presumably.
Yeah.
Right, that's great. Thank you for that. So, Councillor Dale.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your report, Sue. Can I just ask, just in future, do you think we could have a map of the area where all the schools are? Because I'm sitting here, I live right down at the borders, and I have no idea about half these areas. And I started to print, I couldn't catch them all in. So it would be interesting to see actually the catchment area of Berwick, so you could actually align what the responders have said to actually where they sit in the area. So I can gather the ones that are close by, but not so much the ones that are further afield. Can I just say that obviously on page 55, and this is one thing keep to, is the DFE guidance recommends that decision makers should adopt a presumption against the closure of rural schools. So that's on page 55 of the County Council's report, of the Cabinet report, it's 33. That's something to take into account. One of the things, and I think Councillor Thorne said earlier on, and I feel some of this is coming through this report, is the concerns that have been ongoing since before we had LGR 2008 about the Berwick High School not delivering a good education. And I have concerns that people are making maybe a decision that Alnwick is a better high school, providing a better level of education for their children, and therefore might be deciding to go and opt with the better provision for their child, which I think I'm going to say every parent would want to do. So I have that. Would be interesting to see if that actually influences some of the information. And going back, I do think that our first schools majority all perform very well. At first schools, I haven't yet seen, which I would like to see, is how that transfers when we've gone to tier 2, how our primary schools are then education standard and where it is, because I think that's something that we really need to look at, because I don't know what it is. So, to say going to 2-tier is a good and better solution. I would like to see the academic outstanding for the whole of the county of all those schools that have actually transferred to 2-tier. I'm very much a 3-tier. We've got 3-tier in our area, and that's what the parents wanted, and that's where we have retained. So what I would like to, Sue, is to find out, basically when you're doing the next consultation, how the results are impacted by the fact that we don't have a good Berwick High School, because that could have an impact, and I would hate to see a partnership collapsing when we should be making Berwick, at least a good school. And that's one of the things that I think everybody's been fighting for, but I know, Wayne, but we can't blame everybody, because everybody's been involved since 2008 trying to do something. And I think we all have to take responsibility that the council's failed in actually getting that leadership and improving the school. So can I just ask if you can, I don't know if you can find that out by consultation, I don't know.
Yeah, there's two things there. The first one about the map, Sue, I think that would be a relatively simple thing to do. Hopefully I'm looking at you.
Well, I would probably, can I just say the reason being... We could probably
provide you with an atlas.
Whether it's further away or closer, or why the responses.
And on the second point
so
around that transition information, I think, Audrey, you wanted to come in on that one, yeah?
Just to say, yeah, obviously there is a mapping system on the council's website, and they're all available. Every catchment area across the county is available with access. But again, if you know, for PDF copy of the Berwick catchment, and again, that was contained within the consultation document that I think is in appendices 1 of the report. But again, if it needs to be larger, then I'm more than happy to provide an additional copy. We will have a copy of the Berwick overall catchment map at the public consultation events. We had it at the last consultation event as well, so that everybody could see where the schools actually fit within the system. And one thing before Audrey comes in, just to say that, you know, the reason why we have taken the time that we have taken on this consultation is to make sure that the community of Berwick support whatever system, particularly support their high school. Because you were right, and you know, I did say this probably at the last meeting, if not the one before, we have got over 200 children every day leaving the Berwick Partnership to be educated elsewhere. And it is important that those children remain in their community to make their local schools viable. And if we would probably be having a very different conversation today if those communities chose to support the school, and that is why we're taking our time with the consultation to develop a model that is sustainable. It can only be sustainable if the local community supports it, and that includes sending their children to the high school. So this is absolutely the strategy behind why we're doing it, the way that we're doing it, before we invest the money that Councillor Daly rightly pointed out. Thanks.
The high school itself, isn't there?
There is capital investment in the whole partnership. The £40 million is for investment in education in the Berwick community. So that'll be your first schools, your middle schools, your high school, whatever we decide. And I think you will see that, you know, under the building implications in the report in front of you, what it says is we will work up some detailed models, what needs to happen for the individual schools. And I will be feeding back to you next time when we come back in the early spring to say, right, this is what the models will look like, this is what this school needs, this is what that school needs, and actually this is how much it's going to cost. Whether it's £40 million, whether it's 60, whether it's 10, we are not determining what needs to happen, and the system of organisation around the funding that sits in the budget, it's actually the organisation that drives the funding that's actually needed, although there has been a significant investment already placed in the medium-term financial plan.
At Berwick High School, that you're actually in there working hard with them?
So a number of things. So we do work really closely with Berwick on a daily basis, you know, if need be. The school improvement team are involved in that. Our SEN team are involved. So I think there are a couple of things that I need to say, and I know David does want to come in. So Ofsted Judgments. So we've talked very much about an Ofsted judgment today, and we're talking very much around Berwick's Ofsted judgment. I would just like to remind this committee that Alnwick Duchess and Berwick Academy have exactly the same Ofsted judgment of requires improvement. So an Ofsted judgment does not define everything about the school. So there are lots of good things that go on in both of those schools every single day. That is about what is judged that the inspection team see on those 2 days of inspection. So I'm making sure that, you know, we see all schools in the round and we look at all children. I would also say that from our primary and early years sector, and our first, David, I'm sure will trip the stat off his tongue, but we significantly perform above the national average for our primary and first schools, and we'll be able to give some of that detail. But it is one of the indicators that for us is always a very strong positive. The other thing I would just like to say, because actually Sue said most of that detail around local schools and making sure that everyone supports, we are in a significantly declining demographic in Berwick. So change in some way, shape or form is inevitable. And it is about making a long-term investment for that locality, for that partnership, to make sure that our children's education is future-proofed moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Audrey. Paul Rickard, I know you need to head off to another meeting, so I wanted to bring you in. You were next on the list anyway.
Thanks, Wayne. I think for me, I think we've got to be really careful of comparisons of geography. I think this is Berwick, and I think we've got to look at Berwick as Berwick and forget about what's gone on with us. We can learn from the past, but on this occasion, this has to be about that geographical area. I think the next thing is echoing what David and Audrey have said about data. At the minute, data is meaningless. There's no long-term trends. We just don't know. There's been so much intervention. There's been so much instability in the system. Data at this moment in time doesn't really tell us much at all, because so much could have happened in that school that we don't know about. So I think we just need to be careful on that. And I think the last thing, and this really came out from the heads in the area, because I journeyed with Sue as another example of how we do all work together. I was there on the dark nights when there was lots of heated debate and everything else. I think what clearly came from the head teachers was the parents need a clear route through for their children. It's not a hybrid, not a mix, not a half job. It has to be from 0 to 18. This is how your children will transcend the system. And I think to then make it more complicated is dangerous. And being candid, that's why we as a diocese have said we actually think 2-tier is the right decision for this partnership and brings it into line with others. I'm really sorry I have to go to an Ofsted. Speaking of Ofsted.
Thank you, Paul, for those comments. Right, next on my list is Councillor Ball.
Thanks, Chair. So, as much as I welcome £40 million into education anywhere within Northumberland, number one, will that be anywhere near enough? And I know you're saying, you know what I mean, and I know would love to have more, but I just think 40 million is a drop in the ocean. Personally, I think the 3-tier system is better. I think moving young people from primary into secondary at such a young age, and the age gap in between the youngest person in that school and the oldest person in that school is vast. And I think emotionally, socially, everything at that age, I think it's a vulnerability that needs to be looked at. I have raised it before, and again, it comes down to the financials rather than anything else, and I think it really needs to be looked at. As much as I welcome 40 million, I can't support closures of rural schools, I can't support job losses, and I think we really need to look at that emotional readiness of going, because personally I think it's going to go through Cabinet on a wink and a nod, but I really think that the emotional readiness of young people going in, and we've asked for this data previously about the comparisons between 2 and 3 tier, and we still haven't had any. So I would really like to see that data to back up that there isn't any damage being done to the young people long term.
So I think on that point, I don't think it necessarily needs an answer there, because this is about moving to phase 2, where some of that granular detail will come through. So I think your points are noted there, but I think a nod and a wink is not necessarily how I think things run, but it is about engaging with our communities. So next we have Councillor Dunbar, then Councillor Dodd, then Councillor Swinburne.
Thank you, Chair. Some of the comments I was going to make have been addressed by others, so I'll just bash on with what I was thinking and get the answers that I'm going to ask for the questions. So, I gather Annex 2 tier, Barracks 3. Annex going to be affected, a partnership's going to be affected or whatever. What I was going to ask is, would a hybrid system be sort of considered for some of the areas within Berwick or not, to relieve some of the problems that might be pushed onto the Annex partnership?
Yeah, just to come back, obviously to get to this point, as I've already said, I think we've been working 12, 18 months with the individual head teachers particularly. And I think we started off with 7 options. I think you'll remember me feeding back last time. And a number of those were hybrid options around how that could work. And again, those were obviously we did workshops with the head teachers to explore, the pros and cons around each of the models. Those were also then presented to each of the individual governing bodies for them to feed back to us. And it was very clear that the governing bodies and the head teachers themselves didn't support a hybrid model. They felt that it needed to be, as Paul Rickard described, a very clear system, whatever that was, and not to have dual phased intake, for instance, when we've had mixed economies in other partnerships before, where children have joined their high school either in year 7 and again at year 9. And again, this is feeding back what others have fed to us. And that is why, you know, when we came to you last time, in fact, we said that we would just go forward and consult on the merits of the 2-tier system and the 3-tier system, because really that's what the schools themselves wanted. So that's where we're at. That doesn't preclude people at the next phase coming through with other ideas. You know, people might change their mind. You know, we'll explore all of the options at the next phase. So don't say we won't be coming back talking about it again, but we're not putting it out as a detailed option at the moment. We are proposing or recommending, should I say, to Cabinet that we go forward with the 2 proposals, because they are the ones that are supported by the schools themselves that would have to make any changes should anything be implemented.
Thank you for that. I wasn't on the facts when the previous consultation went, so I didn't know about that. What I would like to say really is I really welcome the provision for SEND pupils. I think it's marvellous, it's needed, definitely, and I fully support that. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Dodd.
Bit of a history lesson. I got onto this council in 2001, and the debate there was 3 tiers v 2 tiers. The then Labour controlled, I don't know if it was on a nod or a wink, but it went for trying to get to 2-tier from 3-tier. This rows continued nearly all the time. In every what I'd call term, there's been some area that's been disrupted, or the questions being asked about 2-tier, 3-tier. So it's nothing new. We just seem to have taken a lot longer to get to asking the question. But 40 million is a lot of money, and probably going to last a long time before the area gets another set of new schools, whatever. So I think we've got to get it right, and I think we've got to ask the question without trying to be one way or the other, but I think we have to show some leadership somewhere along the line. If we build a school system that is unaffordable to keep or run, then I think we make a mistake. So I think we've got a consultation that it needs to get on with it, but I don't know what the figures are for 3-tier systems, but they were in heavy decline all across the country last time I looked at this. So I'd like to think, let's have an honest and fair consultation, and let's move on.
Thank you. Councillor Swinburne is the last speaker that I've got indicated.
Yep. Thank you, Chair. Just to reiterate what both the Cabinet Member and yourself have said, the responsibility on this today is progressing to Cabinet. Yeah. It's progressing to the Cabinet. It's not for us at this meeting today to decide whether 2-tier or 3-tier is the better option. The 40 million, if we just progressed into building a new school on £40 million, we'd be failing in our duties. And as Sue has said, that 40 million is for Berwick. If we just built a school without the right structure in that area, it would just fail. So we have to go through this process to make sure that what we put forward is right for the people and for the children in that area, to make sure we're getting the education system correct. Sue said that could be 10 million, it could be 40 million, it could end up being 60 million. We've allocated £40 million, but just to go and build a £40 million school and not get it right in the first place would be the wrong approach. I've got a couple of questions. Firstly, on one of the reasons that someone's put forward for not having a 3-tier system, they've said 11-year-olds are too young to be with 16 and 18-year-olds. Can I ask how many schools where in Northumberland where we already have that in place? Going back a year or two, but I was in a school from the age of 11 where we had 16 and 18-year-olds. I know it's a long time ago, but I just wanted to ask how many we already have in Northumberland in there. And also, you said that you'd sent out in excess of 6,000, to try and invite, and we had a very low number, around 5% respond. how can we increase that engagement at the second stage of consultation to try and get more people involved? Because one of the things that we constantly hear is a decision is made and then we get harangued and you know, bombarded with negative criticism and people never engaged in the first place. And we've had that time and time again with various different things with the council. And we find out that we've had a very low response rate on consultation in this decision-making process. So how can we increase that engagement at the second stage? Thank you.
So in terms of schools, we obviously still have, what's it, 4 or 5 high schools in Northumberland, but the remainder are obviously secondary school from 11 to 18. All of our schools, I think, have got sixth forms, although one of our academy trusts has got a shared sixth form. So there's still a mixed economy, but predominantly we do have 11 to 18, 11 to 16 secondary schools. Again, all that detail is set out in the school organisation plan, and we'll bring that back to you again in the coming months, so that there'll be a reiteration of that, and we'll update that every time. In terms of consultation, I think again this is why we have taken a different approach in Berwick, because it is so important that the community support any proposal moving forward to make it viable, as I've already suggested. So again, we'll probably run 5 or 6 public events so people can come, have their questions answered. There will be in evening meetings, there will be weekends. We'll try to get to people when it's convenient for them to come. We've already held some workshops with particular organisations as well that have an interest particularly around special educational needs. So I've run a workshop with the Autistic Society and the Parent Carer Forum, very much, and also speaking to them about how we can encourage their group of parents or set of parents to actually engage in this process. And I think I'm going to speak to them again in about 3 weeks' time to talk to them about the next phase. So we're working really, really hard trying to get down to grassroots, really, to try and encourage that. And we have taken a different approach in Berwick, again, to try and build that confidence and that opportunity to come and speak to us. Again, it's not about us standing at the front and delivering a presentation and people throwing rotten tomatoes at us. We don't think that works. I don't think that works for the majority of people in the room, that it's the people with the loudest voices that get heard, and not everybody that comes and wants to say, right, my little Johnny, he's got to get at your bus from here to here. How's that going to work? I need to understand what it means for me as an individual, and that's why we run the events like we do, not only for us as local authority officers, with our support from our transport colleagues, other members of my team that manage admissions, us as a senior management team will be there, our colleagues that manage school budgets and finance are there, as well as the schools themselves, because the parents will not only want to ask us questions for the things we're responsible for as a local authority, but actually it comes down to any change or closures. If my school's going to close, who's going to look after my children? How are they going to be safeguarded and protected through this process to make sure that the impact is minimised or negated completely for in any change, which is standard practice for us, whether we're talking whole partnership changes. Individual schools still have changes to the ranges close as well. So that's why we do what we do, to try and make it two-way and not just us talking at people. And that's the way that you listen, different models come out. And again, what you see in the report today, are 2 ideas, 2 models, 2 options. I can't think in the 20 years I've worked in Northumberland coming up that I've brought a report back that has absolutely been one of those options or the other. They will evolve, they will change. People do listen, ideas come forward. So I just want to reiterate, as what Councillor Ren Thompson has already said, that this is a starting point for this part of the journey, and we'll be back in the spring, if approved, to tell you, what we're recommending next.
So I'm very conscious of time, so apologies. I've got 2 speakers, so I know others who've spoken before, because we need to move on because we have some other reports. So I'm just going to take the 2 people who haven't spoken, and then we just need to make a decision to take on the Cabinet. So we've got Councillor Trevor Thorne, and then I've got Reverend Lennox. So Trevor Thorne.
Yes, well, very much welcome the consultation. As I said earlier to our regional director, the problem with Berwick High School has been around far too long. And, you know, people say to me, you know, it's all right to have a problem for a short time, but it's not right to have a problem for sort of 20 years, 25 years. There's always been a question mark above Berwick High School. And, you know, there are very good schools in the Berwick Pyramid. It is a mixed bag. We've got some excellent schools, you know, first school we have. So, you know, there is good education happening there. But as the guy from the diocese said, you know, it's no good at just being good at the bottom. It's got to be good from bottom to top, all the way through. That's what parents want to see. And to be honest, it's not happening now, and people are walking with their feet. You know, we've lost Belford. The catchment is getting smaller. And, you know, I don't think it's necessarily a question of 2 tiers, 3 tiers, but, you know, I have always been in favour of 2 tiers. I would rather we spend less on the buildings and more on the education. I think the 3-tier system is expensive to roll out. The 2-tier isn't. You know, more of your money goes on the education rather than the buildings and the insurance. And I do think, you know, 2-tier fits in better with our key stages. But, you know, the gentleman was saying before, it doesn't matter what is happening around you. We're just looking at Berwick. It does matter what's happening around you, because with the rest of the county, or a lot of the county going 2-tier, it does impact. It does eat away on the catchment of Berwick. So, you know, that is important. And, you know, Audrey's comment too about the schools being in a similar position, Berwick and Alnwick. Well, Alnwick has only just gone into requires improvement, and I hope it comes out of it very quickly. But yes, you know, we've got to sort this problem. And I would like to think too that, you know, we get the data as well. Yes, the data's got a question mark over it because of all what's gone on before, and the fact that we've had lockdown and there's been learning on the laptop. But, you know, let's have that data, because data helps us to make a decision. Yes, we can qualify that data, but, you know, we do need it to move forward. We do. Yeah, those are my comments.
Thank you, Councillor Thorne. Reverend Lennox.
Thank you, Chair. I'm used to preaching 3-point sermons, so I've got 3 points, if I could just reiterate that. First of all, I would echo some of the things that has already been said. I think we've got to look historically at the authority. We've got, over the many, many years that I've certainly been attached to this authority in various contexts, there are various things that have happened which I think we need to learn from, even in this present situation. We need to look very carefully at it. Secondly, I have some questions about the data. And looking at some of the data that's been presented, for example, on page 41, 6,376 people were consulted and only 365 responded. And from that, 365 were making an analysis. You know, statistics get a bad name. And the reason for it is the fact we don't interpret the data correctly. And we're going to have to correctly collect the right kind of data and to ignore the biased, you know, the biased data that can so easily distort a decision. So I would urge us to look very carefully at how the data is collected and how we interpret them. And thirdly, just from a personal point of view, as someone who taught for many years, I've said this before in this meeting, for many years in a 2-tier system and in a 3-tier system, I know that long-term, from personal experience, the children get a better deal under a 2-tier system than they do under a 3-tier system at the end of the process. And I mean at the end of the process. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. So, members, I'm sorry, I am going to have to speed this through. So, we have got a report in front of us which is seeking our views and we have the Cabinet member sitting on the end here, so to move to a phase 2, a more nuanced, a more informed and a more granular consultation process with the community in Berwick. I don't see anybody objecting to us giving permission to Cabinet to approve them to do that. And I think, and we will get a map, Councillor Dale, for you, not a problem. And I think it's important that we get that. I would like to add one thing. I would like every single member of FACS to be offered an opportunity when we have engagement events in Berwick, if you want to be able to attend them, because that will inform you when we move on to the next stages in spring and beyond. So I think it would be a good opportunity for you to see how the community engages, why they engage, because you're going to be part of this process. Today is just the start of the journey. And I hope that the people of Berwick own that journey, own what they need to do for their young people, and own how we do that. I know Councillor Fairley said you're desperate to step in. I will give you 10 seconds and then I'm going to close it.
Well, we experienced this. We had a great feedback with Hexham. We did experience I've been through this, and I would like to be there. That's great. And I would like to say thank you, because the consult is important if it's done full disclosure on what schools are going to close. And you did listen to us. And I want to encourage Berwick parents and communities to feed into the consult, because it does work, and you did listen, and it was fantastic. And we have this multi-form, different model, the multi-mixed model, and it's working, and it's fabulous. So thank you for that. But for the data for the middle schools, yes, they are in decline, rural areas, very quickly. That is true, and I think that's because of they're not meant to reflect the national curriculum. I think that's the problem, rather than actual children's stages of development. Yep. The actual data to do with middle school successes is on the National Middle School Forum site. It's all there in black and white about the primary first mix. Go and have a look at it. Rural Suffolk tried to change over in 2018 and are not doing very well at all. That was the last one to try and change. So go and look at those figures. They're on BBC News websites. Other news channels are available. But the feedback on what they did and it didn't work is right there. 3-tier rural areas.
Thank you very much. We should get you on telly. So, and I had a very enjoyable day at the Hexham Mart with Stars Group. It was great. It was great. So, I don't see anyone objecting to us allowing Cabinet to move forward with that. So, on that point, that's the note which will go to Cabinet on Tuesday of next week. So, thank you very much for your very detailed responses on that one. If we can now move on to item number 7 on the agenda, which is the supported accommodation and lodgings for care leavers and young homeless. And I believe that Lynn Bryden and Ginny Younger are going to take that verbal presentation, I believe. So, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Hello, my name is Lynn Bryden. I'm the Senior Manager of Commissioning in Children's Social Care, and this is...
Hi, I'm Ginny Younger. I'm the Accommodation Team Lead at Northumberland Adolescent Service.
We're seeking permission to go to tender to commission a range of services that will support our young people with supported accommodations and lodgings for care leavers and young homeless people who are at risk of homelessness within Northumberland. The Council does have a duty to provide services to a cohort of vulnerable young people under the Children's Act, looked after young people and care leavers, young people presenting as homeless, and also unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. To do this, we try to provide a range of services from the market, which is a range of single accommodation services, which provides accommodation and support, group accommodation, floating support and supported lodgings. So it is a mix of accommodation and support for those young people, because we're keen to ensure that we provide good quality accommodation for young people, but also that level of support that will meet their individual needs and help to support them to work towards independence as they move towards adulthood. This isn't something new that we do. We currently have a framework arrangement with a number of providers that is due to expire. We're looking to re-tender this service because there is it's partly due to expire, but also there are some changes within the market. This is currently an unregulated service, and Ofsted are looking to introduce a level of regulation in the near future. So they're looking to introduce changes in January. They're going to present what that framework will look like. Providers will have the opportunity to register and express their interest in sort of the spring with a view to becoming regulated in the future. So we're looking to change from a framework arrangement to what's called a dynamic purchasing system, because what we need is a degree of flexibility when we're working with the market to ensure that we do have a good range of support for young people. So the key difference between a framework and dynamic purchasing is that it's not a one-shot attempt. A dynamic purchasing system can remain open, so providers can apply over a period of time so that they are pre-approved and they can work with us. Now, by working in that way, that will allow the council to be more flexible in terms of being able to accept providers under what is effectively our pre-approved list. It's important to say that none of the providers are guaranteed a level of business. We do just purchase what we need, and all of the providers have to go through a process to ensure that there is a level of quality, and we measure those outcomes against those that those young people are achieving. The Ofsted regulation will see an improvement to that process, and also will strengthen the framework that we're working around. So what we're looking to go to Cabinet for is permission to embark on this procurement process. We're looking for permission to structure it in this way, and we're looking to give delegated responsibility to Graham Writer as Children's Services Director to be able to sign off and approve that contract. There will, of course, be an awful lot more detail than there is contained within the Cabinet report in terms of the specification and in terms of the requirements that we expect providers to adhere to. But the fundamental driver is the ability to be flexible and to be able to meet need, and to be able to ensure that we are able to have that access to a range of good quality services across the county to be able to meet our statutory duties. That's very whistle stop. So
very good whistle stop.
Happy to take any questions.
Right, Councillor Dale.
Sorry, can I thank you for that? How many children, not children, adolescents, young adolescents, around that age, are actually seeking accommodation approximately per year? I have no idea whether you're talking, what numbers you're talking about, because obviously I'm just looking at the value of the contract.
Absolutely. Ginny will be able to give you the figure. What I should say is there is a range and level of services, so there is a great variety within that varies in price. So some young children require very intensive support, where others, the support is less. But I think it's, Ginny, am I right in saying it's a...
So can I just ask, these are, I mean, what I'm saying, we had one in Hexham, a home in Hexham, and I'm glad Ofsted are coming in, because it was closed down eventually because it wasn't being monitored and everything else. Going back a bit, it's not that long actually, but it was. But I'm pleased about Ofsted, but it's actually putting the amount of children who actually need care and the value of the contract, and seeing if it's the right amount or whatever. Just have some idea.
I can give you some context around that. I mean, if we look at, since the current framework came into place in January 2020 to date, we've made 156 placements for young people across a range of services. And if we look at our placements since April this year, we've already made 55 placements. What we have seen is an actual increase in placements. So if I look at the placements we completed in 2021, 20 to 21 to 21-22, we've seen about 116% increase in the need to provide placements. But as Lynn explained, we have lots of different providers. So we have a Lot 1 provider that's very complex, intensive housing support for young people. We have Lot 2 providers which are more mainstream sort of generic support to young people, and then we have floating support. So there's a lot of ranges, but to give an example, if I looked at Lot 2, which is our mainstream providers, if I look at 2021, we placed in the region of about 23 young people. In 2021-22, that increased to about 37 young people. And at this moment in time, in this current financial year, we're sitting at around about 26-27. We anticipate by the time we get to this financial year, we will have again exceeded what the numbers we placed in the previous financial year, because there is an increasing demand. And that demand will also likely increase because we are as a county council, we are now a part of the National Transfer Scheme, which is through the Home Office, and we are mandated to take a set number of unaccompanied asylum-seeking young people, and those figures are increasing. So we know that that's going to impact potentially as well on the demand across services.
So when these people are coming, just out of interest, because I think it's an interesting point, is, I mean, we used to have Bernardo's homes and people and all kinds of, providers for, sort of thing. So what the type of providers are we looking at? I'm saying what type of provider? I have no idea. I mean,
can I just come in there, because I think actually because what we're discussing now is permission to move to this dynamic purchasing arrangement, which is a statutory thing we need to do, and it needs to go through Cabinet. I think there is something about perhaps bringing you back at some point to provide the committee with an overview of what you do, for us to, I think, spend a bit more time to respect the amount of work that you're doing. So I'm not cutting you off there. I just think it's a really good opportunity to highlight some of the work you're doing and present that. So Chris will make a note of that. So on the specific point of what's on the agenda about the movement of the current system to a dynamic purchase, which is 1.25 million, 12.5 million over 10 years, going out there, hopefully buying the best for our young people. I don't see anyone objecting to that, no. So on that basis, I think it would be fair to say that we would be minded to support this move by Cabinet, and Chris will try to get something tabled in, and we'll have you here for at least 6 hours. Lots of PowerPoint presentations, please. Maps, everything, and that would be great. So that's good. So thank you for that. We're now moving on to item number 8, which is the Northumberland Strategic Inclusion Plan. Sue, I think you're covering this one as well.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The purpose of today's report is bringing together a lot of work that's gone on over a number of years, more years than probably we originally planned. But really what we want to present to you today is our first Northumberland Strategic Inclusion Strategy. And I know FACS members have been on that journey with us, particularly those members that form part of our Task and Finish group. And again, thank you all to everybody that took part in that started the journey for us. So the report today also provides you with an update of the number of permanent and fixed term exclusions across Northumberland over the last 8 years. And I'll talk in a little bit more detail about the more recent impact that is having on our numbers. The report on the findings and recommendations originally, where the strategy has come from, has been as a result of the findings and recommendations of the Exclusion Task and Finish group. Again, they were presented to FACS at the end of November 2019. And since that time, officers have developed an action plan. We've established multi-agency working groups. We have carried out the governance structure to develop the Northumberland Strategic Inclusion Plan that forms part of the report in front of you today. So the new document sets out our 5-year strategy on how we will support all Northumberland schools and academies and settings to ensure that they are inclusive, with the aim to meet the needs of all the pupils in their communities. Easy words to say, very difficult to ensure. The Northumberland Strategic Inclusion Strategy is contained at Appendices 1 of your report, and this has been developed with our multi-agency group in discussions with our head teachers, SENCOs, designated teachers, governors, our alternative providers, and the views and experiences of our parents, carers, children and young people have all been drawn on to present the final draft of the strategy in front of you today. The strategy really draws heavily from examples of strong leadership and good practice that already exists in many Northumberland early years settings, schools and post-16 provision. And there is also robust evidence of strong inclusive practice and a reduction in exclusions in a lot of our schools. Turning to the strategy itself, just really to highlight more around the structure, that the strategy is split in 4 different strands of proactive work to prevent exclusion and secure the best outcomes for all of our children. The first strand is the mainstream offer, and this consists of school-based interventions and support that demonstrate a consistently applied graduate response to all pupils' needs. And again, you can see a lot more detail about the approach and particularly the promises that we make as a local authority, how we will support schools in ensuring that that is the outcome. Strand 2 talks about fair access and inclusion. And again, this sets out the protocols, the multi-agency decision-making that we are now undertaking to ensure that we have fair access and inclusion through the intervention and prevention, and ensuring, again, the best outcomes for those children at risk of permanent exclusion. And I'll talk a little bit more about the impact that the team have already had using some of our fair access protocols and the work of the inclusion team in a minute. The third strand talks about best practice. It's really important that our governing bodies and schools are well informed around ensuring best practice, particularly when it comes to permanent exclusions. So again, this strand sets out the support on offer to ensure statutory guidance around exclusions is followed, and that permanent exclusions and where permanent exclusions are high or increasing, that suitable challenge and preventative measures are put in place. So again, that's our strand around holding governing bodies particularly to task, but also supporting them in their final decisions around exclusions. And our fourth and final strand talks about our specialist settings. So this is very often where our children and young people attend, either on the journey to permanent exclusion or as a tool to prevent permanent exclusion. And again, just to give you an indication of that, we've currently got 125 children and young people, more young people I think, in our alternative provision settings. So this strand really sets out the role of our alternative providers within Northumberland, and also sets out our ambition to build capacity within the system to ensure our children and young people have access to high quality education with ambitious pathways as close to their home as possible, which again leads very nicely into one of our key priorities for our wider education and skills strategy. Really, I think the role of FACS has been really key in developing the strategy, but we need to think now as business as usual. As we have developed the strategy, we need to be thinking about how we embed the work that is contained in the strategy and how we move forward with that. So one of the proposals is that the governance responsibilities for the implementation of the inclusion strategy becomes the responsibility of the recently formed, although we've found out it's been a year now, of the Education Strategy Board, and that they will keep this strategy under review. They will alter it as necessary to incorporate newly published legislation and statutory guidance. And again, around that, obviously Catherine talked about the school's white paper, but there's also the special educational needs green paper that also puts a responsibility on the local authority in the future to develop a local inclusion plan. So very much we see that this document will form part of that wider strategy for us as a council. And again, really, we will still report, I suppose, the impact of the strategy back to FACS, but probably through the annual report that the Director of Education does on an annual basis. So again, we'll make sure that there's a section within that report, so you're still kept abreast of the impact that the strategy that is put in front of you today is having. Really, just to move on then in terms of some of the detail, just to highlight. So again, a bit of an update on exclusions. You can see table 7 in your report now provides the 8-year trend. So we have included the last academic year within that detail. And as you can see, unfortunately, there has been an increase again in our permanent exclusions for 21-22. And again, we believe that this is the impact of COVID and how that's not starting to show within Northumberland, resulting in the rise in both permanent and fixed-term exclusions. However, we're also seeing a new trend that is starting to emerge, specifically with the increase of pupils in years 7 and 8. We're seeing a definite increase in permanent and fixed-term exclusions in that age group. And again, we believe that this is due to time missed in years 5 and 6 in their primary schools during the COVID pandemic, and the challenges around implementing transition arrangements in order to prepare the children for their onward journey, particularly to secondary school or high school. And again, the information is further broken down in appendices 2, which show the number of permanent exclusions over the last 4 years by school. And again, that was specifically asked by one of our members of our committee that also form part of the task and finish group. So really just to give a bit more detail and context. But I did want to end on probably a little bit of a better note, shall we say. And that's really just to say, although the strategy has taken some time to bring forward, that hasn't stopped, the fantastic work of a number of teams across the council, both within our special educational needs team and also within my own inclusion team, that really have the responsibility for ensuring that the council fulfils its statutory duty in relation to those children who have been permanently excluded and those at risk of permanent exclusion. So you will see a couple of paragraphs in your report that talks about the impact, particularly of that team, and without the support, I suppose, of the task and finish group, the governance structure around the development of the strategy has meant that we've been able to bring in additional funding, create additional posts, and really have an impact on preventing exclusions. So again, you can see from your report that the team, have been working with about 250 children and young people that have really been coming to the end of the line in terms of being at risk of permanent exclusion. And again, from those that the team worked with, 88% of those that have been referred into the team for support have remained in mainstream. So again, without highlighting this as a significant issue, creating capacity, I'm sure we would be sitting with a much higher number for the previous academic year than you actually see in front of you. We've also had a lot of success around managed moves. So this is where there is an opportunity for a child to have a fresh start at a new school, at a new mainstream school. So previously, we've only had around a 20% success rate of those new fresh starts actually being successful. But again, over the last 12 months, again, we've targeted specific resource around that, and that has led to a 65% success rate. So again, a fantastic impact that the team have had. And more recently, we as a team meet more or less on a termly basis. This is my school organisation and resources team, so we get together to celebrate the achievements, because it's really hard sometimes. We're constantly dealing with issues, so I think it's really important that we celebrate the achievements of the team. And I just wanted to share one of the things I was told by one of my inclusion support workers that had worked with a particular young lady that had been permanently excluded from a private school, had then been permanently excluded from a mainstream school, but then was given a managed move and another chance. And that young person has been offered a place at Oxford this year and has just started at university. So, you know, there are some good news stories. I know when we come to committees, we tell you about big numbers, don't we, and the impact. But for every failure, there are also successes. And I just thought I needed to share that with you today as well. Thanks.
So that's a lovely example to share. That's great. And again, in the previous discussion we had on Berwick, there was lots of reference to data. Well, here's a clear example of how data informs decision making and action, because Councillor Swinburne led on the exclusion back in 2018 because of those figures. Now they are on the increase, so it's like a lot of things in life, it's a constant refresh and keeping on top of it. And now that we've got this in place, then I think that will help our young people. Does anyone want to comment? Mr. Hodgson? Right, I've got a whole load of hands. Right, Mr. Hodgson, Councillor Ball, Dunbar, Swinburne. Right, and I'll keep you right on the number.
Great. Thanks, Wayne. Yeah, I mean, it's smashing to have the inclusion strategy, but obviously that data on Appendix 2 on page 141, I mean, what it does highlight, I mean, you've got 5 schools basically accounting for over 71% of those permanent exclusions in 21-22. And those same schools, over the 4-year period, account for well in excess of 60%. Now, I'm on a governing body of a school in Pennywell in Sunderland that is one of the most challenging areas in the country. And last year, 21-22, we had 3 permanent exclusions. And this was an all-through school, 4 to 16. Now, I know from the budget how much it costs for alternative provision, and the school really does utilise alternative provision. In other words, permanent exclusion is an absolute last resort. But it costs them a fortune. Now, they're lucky in that they've got strong finance, they've got a strong budget. But my worry is that are some of these schools that are on this list, and say those 5, are they being forced to go quickly to permanent exclusion because the budget pressures mean that they cannot afford to go into alternative provision? And that's, you know, that's not really answered with those statistics. But is that an issue?
I don't know if we can answer that, but if we can't, we can probably drill into it afterwards, yeah? Yeah, I think we'll come back, and I think that's a very valid point.
Good question.
Yeah, so if we can make a note of that, and we will definitely get that back, because as you say, there could be a rationale why it's a particular cohort that's dealing with that, but valid point. Sorry, Sue?
Yeah, there is one thing that I'll draw your attention to in the strategy, and that's one of the things that we had the first meeting of last week, is our inclusion group, where we sit to meet and can target additional resources to schools. So we are giving, for the first time, you know, it's only been set up. We've had the first meeting last week, and we're meeting fortnightly, where schools can actually refer pupils in where they need some additional support, whether that is support from us as a local authority in terms of our services going in and supporting the school, or whether they're coming to us and saying, actually, you know, I'm in Alnwick and the nearest alternative provision is in Blythe, and therefore I need some support with transport. I can pay for the alternative provision place, but I need some support. So as a result, again, of this strategy and highlighting the issues that you've mentioned around funding, we're trying to address that with this multi-agency panel. And I will say it was a very successful first meeting, but I think it's going to be a group that's going to be sitting for more than an hour at a time with the requests as that we're actually moving forward.
And so I fully appreciate that Northumberland has different issues to Sunderland in terms of the location of the alternative provision. I mean, obviously Sunderland, they're much nearer the schools. So yeah, it's a fair point.
Thank you for raising that. So I have Councillor Ball, Councillor Dunbar, Councillor Swinburne.
Thanks, Chair. So again, it's just with regards to page 141 in that table. So when you read the figures, I'm quite horrified to see how Ashington and Bedlington especially are faring on this table. So I'm just wondering, is there any way we can get more meat on the bones for this? Is it a case of, is it just higher student numbers that are accounting for the raised number of people that are permanently excluded? Is it a case of the same trust? Is there any chance we could have some more details? Because I just think them figures for Ashington and Bedlington, and I will include Blythe in there, because they are stark in contrast. And does it drill down to funding in the schools? Is it the same academy trust? What is it that's causing Ashington, Bedlington and Blythe not to be faring as well as some other areas?
And I think that's the point that Mr Hodgson's raised about that drilling down into these numbers. So I don't think we're able to do that today, but I think it is a valid question for us to ask. I know Chris has taken a note of it, and what we'll do is we'll get that detail and provide it back, because if there is something which can be helped and something we can help with and support as a local authority, then I'm sure we'll do that. And if that brings those numbers down, then that will have a huge impact on on those figures. So we'll definitely pick that one up. Councillor Dunbar, next.
Thank you, Chair. I would just like to say it's a fantastic strategy and report, and I'm going to say thank you to my colleague who spearheaded it, and I could understand why it's so in-depth and comprehensive, and it's really good. It's really good. It was really nice to see and to read it and refreshing. There's one bit I want to sort of raise is I'm really pleased that the PRO's regulations have been tightened up, because I thought, as being an ex-governor of the PRO, it was used unprofessionally. All I can say, I thought in the past, and I'm glad that's been tightened up and improvements are going to make. Regarding the Appendix 2 with all the lists of the exclusions, etc. I've only got one question that may be added on to what's already been said by two other colleagues here. Are the academies accessing the free support and guidance that regarding the young people who are at risk of exclusion? Are they contacting to get the help and support they could have?
Yes, the majority are, but sometimes it is a bit more challenging to get into some, because I think, again, as we've already said, it's about forming relationships, isn't it? And as staff change and things change, you've got a very strong relationship, and it's just making sure constantly that our academies very much know that is on offer to them. One of the things that is currently out in the public domain is there is an opportunity to bid for an alternative provision free school. So again, this is something that would be a registered provision, because if you remember, in Northumberland we haven't got any registered alternative providers. So that means our children and young people don't stay all, for the whole week in one provision. They're at different sites for different provisions for different days. Normally a 3-day provision and a 2-day provision. But the opportunity to bid for a free school has presented itself. We are currently working, and I'm meeting with some of our academy trusts and alternative providers next week to put in an expression of interest. So again, we would hope with some new quality provision coming through that there will be an opportunity to, again, have an impact on the permanent exclusion numbers that you see in front of you today. We will also be going out to tender for, you know, very much as Lynn described previously, we're looking at a dynamic purchasing option for our alternative provision framework as well. So we'll be bringing that probably through to this committee in the coming months with a new framework provision being in place for next September. So again, there's things going on in the background that's also going to support the reduction in the permanent exclusions and the quality of provision that we're going to be offering.
So with the increased work that you're doing, is your team coping, or would you like to have some more?
We'll always have
stuff?
more.
So I just sort of raise that, you know, this is your
Yeah.
chance. Do you need more help? Do you need more support within your team? Because this can get fed back to the Cabinet.
Yeah.
Right. That's all I would say, because I think you're doing a fantastic job. But,
I'll
you know,
pass that on.
the large increase due to the exclusions with the problems that young people have with COVID, and I think a lot of adults are suffering as well with it, never mind the young people. If there's any chance that you need more support, now is the time to sort of say that and get that put to Cabinet, please.
I think you're absolutely right. Resilience in staff members is equally as important as well.
So just before I bring Mark in, just to let you know on the questions which have been asked by a number of people about the detail of this Appendix 2, I've asked Chris to do a briefing note, which he'll circulate to everybody. That may then warrant us to bring this back as a more substantive report, but let's have a look at the rationale first and then decide whether to bring it back and do a more granular piece of information. Right, Councillor Swinburne.
Thank you, Chair. If I can thank Sue and all of those involved in bringing this strategy forward. Sue will obviously recall the lengthy periods and discussions that we had, all those involved, all of the heads and representatives for all the schools, all the outside speakers that we brought in to help to put this together. We had suggestions of what had been taking place in other areas through the country. We looked at those. They said, this works, this doesn't, and this has all helped to bring this forward. If you look at the national picture, it mentions the Timpson Review, which we looked at, and I'm pleased that the government's progressing with information. Page 118, there's a couple of points I want to draw out, and we've learnt from this in this authority. Schools should not rush to exclude pupils. Schools should be inclusive. It mentions about the exclusions process is currently weighted in favour of schools and leaves parents and pupils fighting a system that should be supporting them. Those are a couple of points that we were really focusing on when we carried out all this piece of work, in that it should never be an us and them situation. And Sue and her team have gone about this, and what I was quite clear was, and I was going sort of cap in hand to the Cabinet to say, look, all of these exclusions are costing a lot of money afterwards. What we want to do is we want that money to be spent up front to stop it happening and stop all the costs. And, you know, to a certain degree, we've got some of that. We've got increased staffing and more input. It mentions, and Sue's mentioned this, page 107, about some of the successes when we've got an 88% success rate. 88% of those referred have remained in mainstream education. We've almost tripled. The success rate has more than tripled from 20% to 65%. That's some of the responses that this team has achieved. And I shudder to think what those figures, which have increased, but I shudder to think what those would have been had those successes not been achieved, had we have not addressed this situation and put those measures and steps in and brought in this work and this strategy to this to this authority, and this down to you, Sue, and your team, Audrey, everybody that's involved in this work, and the schools themselves. Now, you've mentioned as well about COVID has had, you know, an impact, and we can see that the results have increased. But what I wanted to ask is, you mentioned years 6 and years 7. That was right, wasn't it? Yeah. The data that is shown on page 141, can you attribute those increases specifically to those years? Have we been able to drill it down, or could we look to drill it down? Is it any changes, or is it down to what it says, persistent abusive behaviour? You know, is it still down to those, or are there any differences? Mr Hodgson mentioned before about the APs. When we were doing the work previously, I'm trying to remember this right, I'm sure we found that there was one school was paying for alternative provision, even though they might not be using it. They were paying for it up front in case they needed it. But by doing that, it was stopping other people being able to use it. So, you know, that's something that needed to be looked into. As members can see, that there are some similarities, you know, right through some of the schools that are shown in that table, in the results. But one of the things that I was trying to bring out, and a number of us trying to bring out in the discussions, was about the sharing of information and sharing of approaches. So when there's talk about, you know, how many go to certain schools, we have on there Cramlington Learning Village, 2,200 around that figure go to Cramlington Learning Village. We have one permanent exclusion. So I was trying to say to people, can we share experiences, approaches and methods between schools that have more success and more inclusive, I beg your pardon, with some of the others, you know, the Ashingtons, the Blythe, etc., to say, like, what works and what doesn't, you know, and can you share that information? My question is that happening or not? The figures wouldn't seem to show that it is, but I don't know. It's a question. It's fantastic that we are where we are. It's disappointing when you see the tables where we've got exclusions from, you know, people with EHCPs, etc. And even, you know, SEN support, you know, the number of exclusions there, it's quite shocking. Even on the temporary exclusions, I really hope within our figures we don't see, and it's been brought up previously by colleagues, we don't have temporary exclusions where people are excluded because their uniform doesn't quite fit what the school wants, even though the previous term they were in the same piece of uniform. I know one of our members, it's their bugbear as well as mine when it comes to school uniform, but you know, we are struggling at the moment, and if someone has slightly the wrong shade of trousers or slightly the wrong shade of skirt or something along those lines, you know, people are finding it difficult, and children shouldn't be sent home and excluded because of something like that. We need to be that little bit more flexible, you know, on those sort of matters. But overall, thanks so much for the report. As the chair has said, you know, maybe if we can have something a little bit more granular detail and that comes up, that'll go a little bit more to what we were discussing in all the meetings. But the strategy, great, and I'm hoping that we can see a drop in those numbers.
Thank you for that. Councillor Dale, go on then quickly.
I was just before actually Councillor Swinburne spoke, but it was just actually about the it's not the one-off in the schools, and all the schools have got one-offs, but Cramlington Learning Village is being good. We don't have many in primary schools or first schools, they're generally one-offs. However, it's this consistency of annual returns which show 12, 14, 10, 19, and also I'm not going to say that actually Blythe is not bad because they seem to be able to manage 2 years, but it's actually the consistency. James Calvert, they're low, but actually you have to look at the areas they cover too. So it's probably quite easy for somebody in my first schools to say we don't have any exclusions. If we've ever had one, we've managed it, but you wouldn't expect. But we don't have any deprivation. And there's lots of things you have to take into account. However, can I just say that I'm appalled to think that kids are being excluded from school for not having the right uniform and to be permanently excluded. I think that is morally wrong. I'm sorry. I mean, we can provide a clothes bank or whatever, but if that's the reason to be in one of them to be in these figures, I find that quite wrong. I'm sorry, I've just found that wrong.
They're even being sent home for shouting at cabinet ministers, apparently.
They have, yes. Sorry?
We'll pick.
I haven't heard
I
that.
thought you were going to dive in there with that one.
I couldn't hear what you said. Was it rude?
One day.
We'll discuss that another time. So, I think we've had a good discussion on this. We should really have this as an annual report coming to us to show the figures. But let's get that written note to everybody. Sorry, Audrey, you wanted to come in.
Yes, Chair, just to say it's very likely to be included within the annual report, so you'll get the stats there. But I'm happy if this is, it's a motive as well, really important. So I'm happy for that to come. Councillor Dale, I would just like to provide some assurance that we do not have any exclusions on that basis. Thank you. So definitely not. And then my last one was for Councillor Dunbar, and I would just like to invite her to go and see our PRU as it stands now, because I think you'll find a significant difference. So be very delighted to take you and meet the new head teacher and see the work. And actually, we will begin to consider premises as well for that school. So happy to talk to you about that.
And I'm sure that would be an invitation open to all FACS members as well.
Absolutely.
If anyone wants to.
Particularly councillor.
Yeah.
I am aware where the PRU could possibly be going, and I really welcome that.
Yeah, happy to take all FACS members at any point. Any of us would certainly accompany you should you wish that, but head teacher would have an open invitation to you all. So thank you.
Councillor Fellis-Aitken, I'll let you finish this bit and then we'll move on.
Yes, no, I welcome the report. It was very interesting, especially the ages and the physical assault and the SEND students that were high in that category of exclusion. And I also looked at the Timpson Review of Schools and found a note about dyslexics and diagnosed dyslexia and early screening and assessment for that I think I would love schools to be helped with. And the figures are quite frightening. Obviously, dyslexia can lead to other things, other specialist learning difficulties, specific ADHD, or autism can be a marker of low self-esteem and depression, which then becomes disruption later on, which is why maybe in the primary schools the figures are low, and then they go on to be disruptive in the primary schools. And I'm just wondering if there's any budgetary help for those schools that need to put these plans in place to need to complete the screening and assessment of young children with dyslexia in our schools that then go on to be these excluded students. The figures are 2,400 fewer dyslexics would be permanently excluded and 120,000 less fixed term from that Timpson report. And I find that quite interesting that, rather than the horse bolting and dealing with it at that end, the alternative provision is fabulous. Look at the other end where there's minimal exclusions and getting that help in early for schools. And if that could be looked at as part of the budget.
I think David wants to come in as
David
well.
would like to come in on that point.
Yeah, early identification of any special educational need is absolutely key. There are a number of central teams which would focus in on sort of early literacy development, which some of which may lead to identification of dyslexia. It's not something that we've been singularly working on though, so maybe there's a nod there and something that we can actually develop further, but I'll take that to Mike Finlay, the head of the NICE teams, just to see whether we need to focus in that area a little bit.
Yeah, to nip it in the bud early, that would be great. Thank you.
We do need to make progress. Mark, you've got 15 seconds. He's waving at
Thank you, Chair. Just on the back of something Sue mentioned before, when we were carrying out this work, one of our former officers said that he'd been to have a discussion with a couple of young ladies who were permanently excluded. And he sat there, and I mentioned this to Cabinet at the time. He says, look, what is it you would really, really like to do? If there was anything you could do, what would you really like to do? And one of them turned around and says, I'd really like to go back to school. And that's what you really wanted to do.
Good point. Right, so on that note, we have the report, which I think you've all seen. We're happy to take that, and we will get that written note sent out to everyone. Now moving on to the agenda, item number 9, which is the post-cabinet decision on the relocation of the Pegasus Centre. Neil, apologies, this has been a long meeting, but a very interesting one. and you're now about to provide us with at least a 2-hour presentation, I understand. So the floor's yours.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so this is a return to facts to give an update on the project to create a more sustainable future for the Morpeth Group Riding for the Disabled Association, who are currently, or previously, sorry, were supported by Active Northumberland, but as Active Northumberland refocused on their core leisure business, a more sustainable and long-term future plan was required for the RDA. So the report that's been shared gives the kind of fine detail of the progress month by month since the Cabinet decision in March last year. And this really today is just for me to give a summary of the current status of that project, just so you're all informed of where it currently sits. So I would split this into two main elements, and there is the relationship side between the Riding for the Disabled Association, the Morpeth Group, and the college at Kirtley Hall, Northumberland College's campus, and the other element being the site preparation, just to make it more fit for purpose for disabled riding. And there was some maintenance and adjustments to that site to make it suit the community that use the Riding for the Disabled Association functions. So on the relationship side, Active Northumberland have indeed stepped away from the relationship as it grew between the college and the Riding for the Disabled Association group. And they do now have a fully agreed memorandum of understanding between the two organisations on how they will operate together. That has been signed by the college. It is in agreement with the local group of the RDA, and it is in the possession of the national group of the RDA now and their solicitor, so they can fully sign off that memorandum of understanding between the two to continue that relationship together. The three staff that remained working for Active Northumberland previously have to be transferred to Northumberland College's campus at Kirtley Hall. So the actual staffing to support the equine care is now fully in place, and the actual ponies that are owned by the RDA as well have transferred to the site too. So all of that infrastructure is in place, ready to go. And the majority of the lessons and the activity delivered by the RDA is by the volunteer community that sign up with them. These need to be DBS checked under their new role with the college, and given there's in the high 40s of volunteers, that has been a bit of a challenge. And given they aren't full-time paid staff, that has been one of the things that's taken longer than anticipated. However, the college and the RDA are intending to engage schools in riding activity after the October half-term holiday to start to grow the function and get it back into a fully operating format. In terms of the site preparation, so we have been working through with our solicitors a licence to perform the works on the site, and that is now in agreement between the college and the council. So just requiring final legal work on getting that into the finished document and getting the signatures on the document. Some of the final things to be worked through on that particular agreement were around the council's need for a clawback if the college didn't perform its duties in terms of the memorandum of understanding. The college accepting the levels of subsidy control which were at stake. And also we wanted in the agreement between the council doing the work and the college that the college must have that memorandum of understanding in place to give us the assurance that they were in the long term committed to performing the function. In parallel, we've completed the architectural design work and submitted that to the college's solicitor to append to the agreement for the works. And we've also published the tender for the actual contractor to perform the works, which will close on the 14th of October. And in parallel with that, we have also been through a planning permission process and also a listed building consent process. And whilst we're not doing anything anywhere near Kirtley Hall itself, it is within the curtilage, so we do have to be mindful of those listings upon the building. So that is the current status quo for the project. So happy to take any comments on or questions on that or any of the other detail in the report.
Thank you, Neil. Questions? Councillor Dale.
Thank you very much. I did actually ask if this could come to this committee because I had two members of the RDA who brought it up with me to say that they were very unhappy that the work wasn't carrying on. And I noticed that the county council actually have now had to pay for the ponies to be kept in livery.
Active Northumberland made a contribution towards
Well, yes, you've made a contribution to Active Northumberland, didn't? But that there's a contribution from the County Council of 1,500 will be offered to support interim livery.
Yeah.
So I just feel sorry for those children who haven't been able to take part in it, because actually I think when we agreed it was going to be a smooth transition over. And from the report you've written, which is very concise, and thank you for it, because it does give a very clear picture. All the way through, there's been problems.
Yeah.
And it's a lesson maybe to learn that actually things are in place when you're dealing with people who need, just children who are disabled, who need something that's ongoing, sustainable, but actually everything's put in place before actually something's closed. Because you know, I don't know whether you could have extended the lease or whatever, but it's so important that, you know, you don't stop these things. Obviously, you know, it is something that I think is great, because I see kids who've, you know, it does so much good for them. And also got a lot of volunteers who put their time out and they haven't been used, and, you know, there's ongoing things. However, could we have another report coming back? I will have my ear bent again, I know, if it doesn't. But I just think that, thank you for putting an honest report down. And my recommendation in the future would be, if you are dealing with things like this, can we make sure that everything's in place and all the agreements with this case, it's the college, etc., that everything's going to be done before actually the provision stops.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, and I think there is some lessons learned in that. And I think it is a new venture for the college, and I think they're being cautious and making sure they get it right. But notwithstanding, I think the transition, the gap could have been less.
You should put it in place and, you know, turn straight over ponies from one place to another. They might buck about a bit, but, you know, everybody else would be delighted.
Yeah, thank you.
I think if you recall, we were minded as a scrutiny. I think if you recall, we were minded as a scrutiny committee to ask for further detail before this went to cabinet. So again, lesson learnt on that one. But you have the update there. So, and I'm sure that if you want to pick up any individual items, that Neil will be more than happy to speak to you on that one. So, thank you very much for that, Neil. Apologies for the extended wait on that. We then move on to item... Oh, sorry. No, sorry. No. Item number 10 on the agenda, which is the work programme. Chris, you can take that one.
Thanks, Chair. I just really want to say that the work programme belongs to this committee. It's up to this committee to put reports onto it. So if there is anything that members want to add to the work programme, you can always contact me or Councillor Daly. But the work programme that is before you is just a note.
So I will look forward for lots of lists from you. I'm looking at you. Yes. So, item 11 is urgent business. I have not been notified of any, so there isn't any. What is missing from your report is the date and time of next meeting, which is on the 10th of November at 10 o'clock in the morning. So pop that in your diary. Thank you very much for this morning. It has been a long meeting, but I think it's been worthwhile to get the things through. Sorry.
Is it 2 o'clock?
Oh, my apologies. It's actually not at 10 o'clock in the morning. It's at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So 10th of November, 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
The date is the 10th.
The date is the 10th.
Yes.
So it is the 10th of November at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Great. Thank you very much indeed.